Who feels like they're ready now? That's the foundation that we need to remember, right? That's what's under attack. We're going to do a lot of things that probably will be stopped by Bill C-9. So let's make sure we keep doing it, and then we'll fight through that, right? I heard one. Ready, action. This is Bearing Witness. If you were joining us last July or January, you would have also found Fundamental Truth. That was our first of this series. What we're doing is every 3 months, we're going to put together speakers on a certain topic for you all to kind of remember what we need to do and get out there and make sure that we fight hard in every way that we can. This is the stage of history where action has to happen, not just observation. And bearing witness is one of those actions. You make sure that you bear witness, and then what do you do with it? Fundamental truth was, we got to get back to the fundamental truths. Male, female. How hard is that? Right? Indigenous issues. Leighton Gray, if you caught that one, it was a fantastic speech. He started off with his Indian number and then went through the history of why he's been oppressed, suppressed, and depressed as a native. We had Sean Buckley come and talk about some fundamental health truth. Why can't you take supplements? Why can't you choose not to put stuff in your body? This was the beginning of this series. Now Bearing Witness is the action, because we want you to do exactly that. Watch history, record history, and share history. That last one's really important, because that's what all of our speakers here today do. That's what they are fighting for. Some of them get picked up by the police officers and dragged off their university campuses just for asking a question. Thank you, Francis, for being here. We love you. I was recently asked, why do you do this? My honest answer is, I don't know. It's a calling. It's something. I couldn't just sit back and not do something. In fact, that was our plan as a family, was to move out to Alberta and homestead, homeschool, build it up, and focus on that and that only. We actually had everything ready for that. Building plans, the funds, the permission. Yes, you still need permission to build a home. And we had all of that ready. Then a convoy happened. And we were in a trailer in the middle of nowhere in Alberta, watching through Starlink, history change in front of us. And one of the people that really caught my attention and helped me truly understand the value of bearing witness was Viva Frei. A lawyer out of Montreal, a little short guy, he had a backpack, he had his battery packs, he had his camera, his microphone, and he just walked around. Without that, I think the government would have been far more successful with that narrative that they were trying to do. Nazis, racists, misogynists, beating up the homeless, breaking into buildings, none of which actually happened because many people were bearing witness and showed it to us. As a result, we saw the government fight back on that. Bill C-11, Bill C-18, Bill 63 draft, Bill C-9. They want to shut down conversation. You even have the Liberal Party in the convention recently saying we need a Department of Truth. The government needs to be the ones in charge of the truth. There's a book. There's a book about this, isn't there? I wonder what he would say today if he was on this stage. He probably would say, guys, it was supposed to be fiction. But I think he recognized even back then, powers that want to control. It's always been around. Why? Because we're not dealing with liberals, conservatives. We're not dealing with Republicans, Democrats. We're dealing with good and evil. This is spiritual. This has been going on for a long time. Many people have ended their lives at stake. Many people have been quartered, drawn, hidden, found, executed for speaking truth, bearing witness. We live in a society now where snitches get stitches. Police can find themselves at a scene of a crime and nobody will say a word. You all saw it, but they're more worried about themselves. In fact, Seinfeld, you guys watch that show? Remember that one? How did it end? With them going to jail because they witnessed a crime and did nothing about it. Right? You kind of laugh about it, but when you think about it, that was and is our society. So this is why I wrote the book, Bearing Witness. You get a copy at the front, by the way. Because this is what I felt compelled to do. I sat down with my church group many moons ago now, so this would have been 2023, and we said, look, we don't like the Storytime Library hour stuff that's going on. We don't like it. Anybody else don't like it? So we said to ourselves, well, what can we do? And my idea was, well, let's go and just sit in the chair. If we go and sit in the chair and watch them, don't yell at them, don't do anything that allows them to kick you out. Just sit there and bear witness. What are they going to do? I bet you they're going to feel pretty ashamed, judged. Good. One less seat, and we're there for that. That's what started the journey to write the book, Bearing Witness. So I wanted to encourage other people to do what you're doing here today, which is come sit down and watch. You're welcome to record, take pictures, stream it even if you want to today. I would encourage it because that's the whole point. We want more people to see what's going on. When our government cracks down on us, and the only thing we have left is this little device and a connection from Starlink or something else, because soon the other ones, they're going to start shutting those down. And we're silenced, then what? There's that old saying, once they show up to your door, it's too late. I strongly believe that. I strongly believe that because that means they got through the towns and my neighbors and everybody else. So I live in the middle of nowhere. So if they're at my gate, they're there for a reason. It's true. Now, this is one of the reasons why I moved my family out to Alberta. I used to live in Ontario. Don't hold it against me. They didn't hold me. They didn't capture me. I got out of there. I escaped. Welcome. We do see it like we escaped Ontario because this was during the COVID lockdown, 2021. And we were all doing what we were supposed to be doing or what we believed we were supposed to be doing. Stay home, don't go out, let's save grandma, do all of that kind of stuff because it was still early. This was pre-vaccine. And one of the things they said you're allowed to do is go get fuel and food so you can eat. Well, our barbecue ran out of fuel, so that's what I did. I went just down the road. It's 1 kilometer, little corner highway stop that has some fuel for us. And I get a message on my phone. Lockdown, go home. I'm like, I'm a tech guy. I didn't install an app. I didn't say I accept government to track me. I didn't say remind me if I leave my bubble, but they did it. So I thought to myself and my wife at that point, this sucks. I don't want to live this way. I was actually following the rules and I was told to be a good boy. So that's when we decided we got to move. We sold everything except the car and the trailer, put all the things that we wanted to keep with us in the trailer, and then drove to Alberta. We found ourselves on virgin land, sight unseen, we purchased it. First thing we had to do, because our car can't get into the land, is build a driveway. And that's what we started to do, and we thought life would be better. But then the convoy, Viva, Frei, and other things happened. And we're like, oh boy, we don't like this. We don't like the direction this is going, and we want to do something. So that's what led me, and with the support of my wife and children, to start bearing witness. So how many people have seen the Lavigne show? Oh, wow. For those that haven't, hi. I'm Jason Lavigne, host of the Lavigne Show. I host it each morning when we're not traveling so much with my wife. We do a show called Tea and Coffee with Paula and Jay. You just see me in Breton? A local. Say hi. Yeah. Salt and pepper? Hang out there? Yeah. If you know, you know. It's a great place to live and we love it. Hey, Rose. I already told everybody they can record and stream, so you're good. Yeah, you're good. So then that turned into some journalism. I wanted to kind of do what Viva was doing. One thing led to another. I started interviewing people. More and more people came on the show. We've been up to 900 different interviews or guests on our show over the last 3.5, almost 4 years now. Almost everybody who's not afraid to talk to us have come on, including our own premier, Danielle Smith, who will be on again soon because I got questions for her. And I hope you guys tune into that one. But today I got some speakers lined up for you. One of them is going to be virtual now. That was Ken Drysdale. They're doing whatever they can to stop him. They created a storm in Saskatchewan, Manitoba. So if you believe in that, maybe that's what exactly happened. But he did send us his video, so we'll be able to share that with you. And everybody else is here to share why they bear witness, how they bear witness, and I hope to encourage you all to do exactly that. At the front, there is a gift bag. and it's got a podcaster starter kit in it. So a camera, a microphone, some books, some encouragement. And if you've even thought about it or you know somebody that may want to do that, go ahead and throw 10 bucks in and there'll be a draw at the end for that. But I encourage you all to do exactly what you're doing here. Bear witness, record it, and share it. Thank you very much. We'll go ahead with a special message from my mentor, Viva Frei.
Gentlemen of the conference, and that is right. I'm presuming you're either ladies or gentlemen. I couldn't be there in person, so the next best place to do this is from where it all began, my car. Now, my car at the time was not a Ford Bronco, and I was not sitting in a beautiful park as the sun sets in the free state of Florida. But life is a wild journey that you have no idea where it goes, where it takes you, and where it's going to end. Now, I wanted to be there in person, but I couldn't. Impossible. Too many things to accommodate and too many obligations to fulfill. So I'm just going to pretend that we're there live right now with you. Hey, everybody, how's it going? You can do better than that. All right, I'm joking. And Jason, how you doing? Thank you for organizing this. Thank you for inviting me to speak. And sorry I couldn't be there in person. We're entering a world of craziness, people. In fact, we've been in the world of craziness for a very long time. And it would have been a whole heck of a lot crazier. And it would have been a whole hell of a lot more tyrannical had it not been for the independent voices that rose up during the time of madness. I remember when my red pill began. And it was 2015, 2016 when Donald John Trump started running for president. And we, for the first time, I don't know, at least in my lifetime, began to realize that the media was just propaganda. And propaganda is one thing. You know, all right, fine, they have political agendas. They lie to you for ratings. They lie to you for access. They lie to you for politics, whatever. It wasn't until the veil was lifted after the darkness settled during COVID that we really realized the deadliness and the depth to which censorship and the regime would go in total wanton disregard for actual human well-being. Now, the reality is, you know, it might have always been like this to a greater or lesser degree, but it must have been easier to gatekeep information back before the advent of the internet and back before the democratization of information and the access to information. But the silver lining, and it might be the only silver lining, I mean, I guess it's a two-part silver lining. One was the great awakening of the people, and the other was the great migration from the propaganda. When COVID hit, and we immediately realized the degree to which the government lies, the degree to which the media lies, the degree to which the media is funded, subsidized, and thus controlled by the government, and the degree to which they are willing to lie, cheat, steal in order to control the narrative, in order to control the masses. That was the dark side. That was the gray cloud of COVID. The silver lining, it woke people up, and the silver lining, it drove people who were interested in the truth to the people who were speaking the truth. And I still feel kind of like Happy Gilmore, two of the greatest movies ever made, by the way. I still kind of feel like Happy Gilmore, sitting around saying, I'm not a golfer, I'm a hockey player, gosh darn it. And I'm saying I'm not a journalist. I still don't think I am a journalist, but I don't know what that word means now, and I'm not sure what it ever meant. And if journalist meant propagandist, I'm not a journalist now, and I never will be. If a journalist means a truth seeker, then I guess I always have been a journalist. I prefer analyst. I prefer someone who just wants to understand the world and who wants to impart my understanding on others in order to allow them to understand as well. But we're living through something of a revolution of what it means to be a journalist, what it means to access information, and what it means to be able to rely on accurate, independent information that is crowdsourced or that is firsthand information. When COVID hit, you all remember this, and we saw the government propaganda, the lies, the censorship, etc. And we saw how the independent voices were being suppressed. The reality is you can't fool everybody all the time, and you can't suppress everybody forever. And as those voices broke through, everybody started seeing the value of the independent voice. And no matter how much they try to suppress it, like the line from Jurassic Park, life, it finds a way. Truth, it finds a way. And like Buddha said, three things cannot long be hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. We are in that realm right now. We're in that realm where the independent voices have replaced the legacy media, where the independent voices have brought out the propaganda, have revealed the propagandists. And we're in a place now where those independent voices are the biggest risk to the powers that be and are going to be the target of censorship, legislation, and suppression. Those voices shined through COVID, and they still shine now. And the thing is, there's another risk that I'm sort of discovering in real time. If you can't suppress, and if you can't censor into oblivion, and you can't really deplatform anymore because there's actually platforms that respect the independence, that respect free speech, and that will allow independent creators to survive on their own. If you can't stifle the voices, what you can do is drown them in garbage, in noise, in AI slop, in misinformation in the true sense, and disinformation in the true sense. And this is where I think we're at right now, and I'm assuming everybody in the room is having a similar experience, right? Raise your hand if you're having the similar experience. Haha, we're pretending like I'm doing this live. The garbage and slop on the internet, on the one hand, is being used to dilute the true information and the true analysts and the true independent voices. You just throw enough slop out there, people won't know what to believe anymore. People won't know what is real and what is not, and they won't know what is accurate and what is not. And I think we're in that era of a deluge of bots, propagandists, and AI slop, and just slop in general. That has a flip side to it as well. If you can't suppress and squelch the voices, what you can do is throw out the slop and hope that those voices, otherwise trusted and otherwise trustworthy, discredit themselves by making mistakes because of all the slop that's being thrown out there in an orchestrated and organized manner. And I think we're seeing that right now as well. Throw out AI crap, throw out misinformation, disinformation, and hope that the trusted voices slip up, make a mistake, and then get to be demonized and discredited by the government and by the legacy media. And, you know, when I've had Alex Jones on the channel, I think it was the first or second time, but he's been on many times since, he said something that I always remembered. And it's that they try the same tactics over and over again. And the reason why they succeed is because the tactics work over and over again. And my revelation in all of this is the reason why the same tactics work over and over again is that there's a recycling, a generational recycling of people on the internet. And so it's not working over and over again on the same people. It's working on the next generation who didn't go through it the first time. They did this with Alex Jones. You know, I'm sort of convinced that part and parcel of the scandal that sunk Alex Jones was getting him to bite on misinformation and disinformation that they could then use to discredit him, then use to sue him into oblivion, and then use it to, you know, destroy his credibility and legacy going forward. It didn't work. His legacy is what it is. His finances are a little bit different now because of the lawfare, etc. But they did it with Alex Jones. They got him to bite on something that did, I won't say irreparable damage to those who know, but irreparable damage to those who don't know and who still associate Alex with that slip up, that gaffe, that repeating, albeit very limited, much more than anybody knows, of misinformation and disinformation. And they're doing it now on Twitter. Garbage accounts putting out garbage, people repost it, and it's going to be the threat to the independent, reliable voices out there. And it's going to be the number one thing that we're going to have to look out for is verifying, cross-verifying, and doing what none of us really like to do, maybe just holding off on things that you can't yet confirm in order to not make a mistake that would otherwise discredit you. But we're entering a new age of independent journalism. We're now entering a new age of truth-seeking and truth-telling. And, you know, on the other hand, with respect to this AI stuff, and we're getting to a point now where, you know, AI can be slop and AI can also just summarize and condense everything. And people are now going to Grok, they're going to Venice.ai, they're going to any number of other AI platforms out there and asking that for information. And it's going to get to the point where, to some extent, people are no longer going to need other people for information, or at least they're going to think that they won't need other people for information because they can just go to AI and get the answers directly. The question is going to become how independent journalists, analysts, I won't say influencers, I hate that word. I'm not saying podcasters either because that's now become a slur. How the independent voices distinguish themselves from AI, make themselves value added compared to the easy out that you're going to be able to get from AI. And I think at some point, and I think we're getting there faster than slower, people are going to need to, want to, and ultimately revert back to the human element of this, the human connection, the human trust in the individual, in the journalist, analyst, content provider. And it's going to be something, that human element, intuitive persona, as we say in law, something that is tied to the person. You're not going to be able to get it from AI. AI is always going to be inherently flawed, and it's always going to be inherently impersonal. And ultimately, it's always going to be inherently untrustworthy, because AI, in as robotic as it is, will make mistakes, and you will not be able to rely on the judgment of AI the way you're going to be able to rely on the judgment of those independent voices who have proven themselves not fallen into the traps, not been tempted by the poison fruits, and to have stayed true to their calling, to be independent, to be humble, to check themselves, to admit when they make mistakes, and to do their best and apply a methodology that people can rely on going forward. So with that said, the sun has set. I'll show you what it looks like back here. It's nothing but beauty. Good luck, Godspeed. We are entering a brave new world, and just do everything you can to make sure you don't make a mistake and let people say that person can no longer be trusted. With that said, everybody, enjoy the rest of the conference. Peace out. Booyah!
That was, we're back? We're good? That was completely AI, just so you know. No, that was real. That was really him. But thank you very much to Viva. I'm sure he's going to watch this a little bit later. We'll be posting this online, so anybody that couldn't make it will be able to catch this as well. But what did you think of what he said? You got to be careful out there. There's a lot of slop. They're trying to drown you out with noise now. And slop is a term for how you feed pigs, right? Just the leftovers, they get fat, and then all they focus on is eating that now. And this is where the independent, he doesn't like the term journalist, at least the current version. That's where we need to fight back. And one of the great ones out there is actually from the West Edmonton area, just west of Edmonton, Unacceptable Fringe, Derek Smith. Anybody know him? He is proof that all you need to do is grab a microphone, a camera, maybe some toys, put it behind you, and start talking. Because he reaches more people than CTV Edmonton, CBC Edmonton. Like, his show reaches way more people than the lamestream state-funded media does now. So Derek is around somewhere. There he is. I see him. Stage is all yours, my friend. No virtual Derek for you.
Thank you. I try to be fashionable, but how's everybody doing? It's good to see you all here. Thank you for coming out and supporting this. For a lot of people who don't know me, you should. You should join me over on Unacceptable Fringe. For those of you who do, this is going to be a little bit different from what you normally see from me. No racist rants or what people would deem as such. No crazy off-the-cuff temper tantrums. I want to talk a little bit about what I do and why I do it. Unacceptable Fringe started kind of in a weird spot. I've always said from day one, since I was a kid, I'm going to do something big. People are going to know who I am. And throughout my upbringing, I went from job to job. Nothing felt right. And in the late 2015, 2017 era, when tragedy struck our family, my mother was diagnosed with mesothelioma. And we were having our third child. And as things progressed with her cancer, she was bedridden and said, "What are you going to do with your life? You've got a third kid coming, and I'm worried about what I'm leaving behind." And I told her, "Don't worry, I've always got a plan. Everything works out. I'm like a cat. I always land on my feet. Every time I've said I'm going to do something, I've done it. And I'm still going to do something big. And I sat there thinking about what it is I'm going to do. And I had a passion for writing. I wanted to get into writing. I was working on a novel series, going to publish. And in 2020, we got that book out. Finally, after 10 years of my wife supporting my crazy dreams, that book got out. And just as we were about to start the press tour, COVID hit. The entire press tour was canceled. And just before we lost my mom, she said, "Now what are you going to do?" I told her, "I'll figure it out." We always figure it out. Now, when we lost her in the fall of 2020, I stood outside a hospice door and was told, "You're not allowed in there. She might get COVID." Seems rather ridiculous, doesn't it? So my father was left to say goodbye on his own without any support, because one person was allowed in the room at a time. It's not a great way to say goodbye. The day after she left, I watched Premier Pallister in Manitoba lock down all the shops in Manitoba and say, "You can't buy toys for your kids this year, by the way, in the upcoming Christmas season, because COVID hangs out in the toy aisles. You can only buy necessities. Oh, and by the way, I'm going on vacation." Premier Jason Kenney at the time, or as I call him, Fat Stalin, said the same thing. "We're not going to adopt these crazy measures. If you have an exemption, you don't have to wear a mask. Everything's okay." He went on holiday that year. And I thought about standing outside that hospice door. I've always been told, you work hard, you work your way up a ladder, you pay your dues, you pay your taxes, you follow the laws. Life can be okay. My father came to this country as an immigrant from Scotland. And he says Canada gave him everything. Helped him build a company, be successful, have a family. And all he did was follow those principles. Be a good person, follow the laws, pay your taxes. Don't complain too much, and don't talk politics, he says. It's rude. However, things started to change 2021 when the convoy rolled out. And I felt that fire when I saw those trucks rolling into Headingley in Manitoba. News outlets playing videos of kids on CB radios saying, "Thank you." I saw the country that left, the last bastion of Canada, traveling down that highway. It was a real shame. Because in our finest hour, we couldn't fix our problem. The government showed us, if you dare speak up, if you donate $10 to this organization, these people, these hardworking Canadians, we're going to freeze your bank accounts. We're going to throw you in jail. I sat with my kids just after the convoy, after I watched the government turn the police, the military against our own people, smashing truck windows, attacking our independent reporters, jailing people who just held press conferences and said, "We just want to talk to our representatives. We want to talk to the people that we've mandated to ask them why they won't give us a fair shake in life." And we sat around and we were watching How the Grinch Stole Christmas. Well, it gave me an idea. And I finally knew what I was going to do. I wrote a little ditty called How the Prime Minister Stole Freedom in, about 2 hours' time. And I contacted a friend of mine and said, "How'd you like to draw the pictures for this book? I don't think it'll do very well, but you know what? It really expresses how I feel about the government." And they said, "I'm on board. I'm all in." We published it 2 months later. And then I woke up 48 hours after release, and the National Post had the book in there. #1 selling book in Canada. It's telling the Prime Minister of Canada that he's a joke. that he's not all high and mighty, that he's indestructible. And I had news outlets calling saying, could you come on and talk to us? Can you come on our show? Live at the Shed, who was streaming down at the grounds that I watched, reached out, can you come on my show? Viva Frei, can you come on my show? Dr. Jordan Peterson retweeted the book. Can you come and talk with me next time I'm in Calgary? Wow. I thought I found my calling. And then my dear friend Tamara Leach, who I had the pleasure of meeting after this book went viral, went for the Emergencies Act Commission and said, would you like to come down to Ottawa? And I said, I'd love to come down and see what you guys are dealing with. I'd love to see what you're going through. And a Conservative MP reached out named Melissa Lanceman. Whole bunch of us have your book, Derek. We'd really love you to come down to the House of Commons. We'd love to roll out the red carpet. We'd love if you'd sit down and talk with us. Sure. Now, I'll admit, it was a fantastic experience. They did roll out the red carpet. I went to dinner with a number of MPs. I sat down with, hopefully, the future Prime Minister of this country and his wife. Had a real heart-to-heart conversation about everything I've been through, everything the Canadian people have been through, all the struggles I've watched, why we needed change. I got slogans in return. And when I came home, my wife said, how was it? How was the House of Commons? How was everything? I said, you know what? I had a disdain for the government before this, but it's like the Wizard of Oz. I was just invited to look at the machine, and I got to see behind the curtain. And it's changed my whole perspective. Because as we were growing up in the early 2000s and starting a family, getting married, trying to invest in a home, we watched a lot of reality television. And at the time, I bought into the Survivors. I bought into America's Got Talent and American Idol and all these wonderful shows. Oh, look at all these people competing. Look how real it is. It's all scripted. It's fake. And when I got back from the House of Commons, I says, a lot like those reality shows. They'll tell you one thing on camera, but when the lights go out and the cameras turn off and they leave the stage with their handlers and their PR people, they're all on the same team. And they don't give a damn about any one of us. So I decided at that time, maybe being the writer that I wanted to be wasn't my calling. People had a good laugh at that book. So I said, I'm going to give them the news. I'm going to start a channel. I'm going to talk about the news, but I'm going to try and put a funny spin on it so that people have a good way of looking at everything in the world and seeing some sarcasm, seeing some jokes. Maybe have a laugh, put their feet up for a few minutes. But the longer I covered those subjects, the longer I talked about it, the more the channel snowballed and grew. The more I started to realize that people don't want jokes. Sure, it's fun sometimes, but they want a connection. They want reality. They don't want scripts. They don't want fake. They don't want clickbait. They don't want rage titles. They want somebody they can relate to. And that's one thing I found over this 4-year journey that I've taken on YouTube is that the reason people love independent media is because we're not Peter Mansbridge. We're not Pierre Poilievre. We're not Jason Kenney. We're common people. We all share a similar goal. We all see the world the same. We all feel like the government's put their foot on our necks. I'm not a rich man. I don't live a lap of luxury. I go paycheck to paycheck just like everybody else. And people can relate to that. They can get behind that. We watched people like Chris Scott have their business closed. The police came and put locks on the doors and said, you can't work, you can't operate. And we felt something from that because a lot of us either work for somebody or have started our own businesses. Say, well, I wouldn't like it if the government did that to me. We're relatable. I run into so many people on this incredible journey that tell me, oh, Fringe, I couldn't do what you do. I wish I could, but I just can't. Why not? I'm not special. Now, as Jason mentioned, I get more viewership than CTV or CBC or anybody else, but you know what the difference is? I'm not a phony, and neither is anybody in this room. Take out your phones. get a microphone. They're very inexpensive, folks. And just talk to people. You don't have to have the tricks and the trades or the quips or anything fancy. I got a whole room of toys behind me, and people still listen to what I have to say. I had Premier Smith on my show when I lived in Calgary, and I had a whole bunch of arcade machines behind me because we built that for my kids during the pandemic so they wouldn't go insane. And the first thing I had to say to her, I apologize for the background. I know it's childish. And she said, I love it. I absolutely, when can I come over and play? And we've had the Premier over, and yes, she does play very well on some of those arcade machines. But the fact of the matter is, folks, you don't have to be a suit. You don't have to be professional. You don't have to even really know what you're talking about. Just be relatable. Take out your phone, get the message out, because as time goes on, they're going to continue to drown us out. They're going to continue to censor us. I don't know if anybody's aware, we're about to see a majority government in this country that's passing censorship bills. Every single day I go out onto YouTube and I watch my videos go like this. I say, what's happening? Well, same on Rumble. Doesn't matter where you are. The problem is the CRTC. The problem is the government. The problem is that they tell these companies, if you want to operate in our country, you're going to play by our rules. My wife says, what are we going to do? Same thing I've always done. We're going to get through it, and we're not going to stop. She says, well, what if only 100 people watch you? It's 100 more than were watching me before we started this. So let's keep going. Let's get it done. I say the same thing with Alberta independence. Now's the time to look at your government. Now's the time to look at what you're doing and ask, are we ready to keep spinning our wheels in the mud? Or are we prepared to say, enough is enough? Where is everybody's line? I don't think enough Albertans have seen it yet, but they're about to. If you haven't yet signed the petition, and I wasn't going to bring Alberta independence into this speech, make sure you hit the back and sign the petition. Get your family, your friends, everybody, sign that petition. It's more important now than ever. Ever. Whenever I hear people go on YouTube and say, well, there's only you, there's Moose on the Loose, there's the Pleb, there's all these guys, I always go, oh, don't listen to those guys, come watch me. But I love them all. They're all good people. But there can be more. You could be on there. You could be on there. You could be on there. And you're okay, Jason, but you know. The bottom line is, folks, is this needs to grow. And the only way we get out of this is if voices continue strong and we stop putting up with what we're told to take. Stop putting up with the status quo. Start believing in yourselves. Believe in your province. If you're here and you're not watching online, believe in Alberta. Because it's the greatest province in the earth. It's the greatest place to live in the world. And it's about to become even better. So with that, everybody, I thank you for listening to my story, I guess. I more just wanted to talk about where I came from, because a lot of people say, oh, I couldn't do it. You can. Go do it, please. Please join what we're doing. Join me on my show. I promise it won't be sentimental like this in the future. I'll go back to being everybody's loudmouth jerk. But I thank Jason for having me on the platform today. I thank you guys for coming out. And please keep everybody's voices strong and sign that petition if you haven't already. Thank you. I don't know how to get that back. Thank you, I love the pin too.
Yeah, go give Derek a follow. He's awesome because he has guys like me on from time to time. He jumps on my show too. And that's how you know that we're all independent. We actually work together. We're not, building guardrails around ourselves, shooting each other down or trying to compete that way. We actually work together. That's how you know they're good ones. And one of the really good ones, John Bolton, not the U.S. guy. When I first had him on, somebody reached out to me like, how did you get John Bolton? Well, he's in Calgary. He's a good guy. He's like, oh, I thought you were talking about the other one. Like, no. He hasn't been on. But John Bolton is a great guy. He's been in radio for 40 years, is it, John? Up there. And he's got the voice for radio, that's for sure. Without further ado, let's go ahead and bring him up on the stage and give him his 20 minutes. You want it in a stand or you want to hold?
You stole my line about the other John Bolton. I used to have a website a number of years ago. It was johnbolton.ca. Don't have it anymore. And I used to get email asking me to go out to speak on at Republican conferences and stuff. And I used to have a picture of the John Bolton, the former U.S. ambassador to the UN, and a picture of me. And we don't look anything alike, not even close. I'd like to thank Jason and his wife, Paula, for having me here. Thank you so much for doing that. I appreciate it. Just give me a second. Let me take off my glasses so I can see. My dad used to say that all the time. I never could understand it when I needed glasses. I don't go to too many events. I don't. As Jason said, I worked in radio for 35 years. I used to have to go to everything. And when I moved to Calgary, I didn't have to go to anything, and I felt good about that. I go to very few events. I go to just important ones. And this is an important one. You know, I've met Jason a couple of times in person. I know him more through a camera, and I think we've become kind of friends, which I think is great. I have to say, I was a little bit nervous about doing this speech. It was funny, I was listening to Viva Frei, listening to a bit of what the Fringe said, and I think you're going to hear a common thread here today, but Viva was reading my mind in a way. I was a bit nervous about doing this. I put off preparing for this speech until yesterday. I have plenty of experience with public speaking. I'm comfortable doing it, but I wasn't sure that I belonged here. I had Jason on the other day on my channel to talk about this event, to explain the reason for it. Bearing witness. What's the dictionary definition of that? Well, it means to testify to, provide evidence for, or affirm the truth of an event, experience, or fact, often acting as a first-hand observer. When I posted my video with Jason, I created a thumbnail of hundreds of people holding up cell phones. Can you hold up your cell phone if you've got it handy? Just hold it up. Hold it up. And I titled it, "We Are the Media." Now, Viva talked about journalists, and if you look up there under my name, it says Alberta journalist. We are all journalists. There is an argument, a criticism made by people who are in the mainstream media that someone with a phone isn't a journalist. You know what they say is a journalist. I know. I went to school with them. I went to broadcasting school many years ago. They're high school educated, taught how to edit tape and video. They ask some questions. They put together a 60-second news story to be played on the radio or television, and that is it. And you can do all of that with this and more. Many of you here are more educated than a lot of the people that are giving you the news on CBC and CTV and other news organizations that are considered legitimate news organizations. Now, I'm not saying that people who only have a high school education are not educated. For the most part, that's all I have. And well, look at me, I'm rather intelligent, right? So I'm here to bear witness today. So who am I? Some of you may know who I am. Why am I here? I wanted to know. I've wondered that myself. I'm here amongst some people who are far more accomplished and established in the task of bearing witness. Stockwell, Dave, Viva Frei, my friend Derek, Unacceptable Fringe, Chris Scott, Francis Widdowson, others here today. Stockwell Day, former leader of the Canadian Alliance. This man has made history, for God's sakes. Worked with Stephen Harper. I think he worked with Ralph Klein, if I remember correctly, as well. Viva Frei, and if you're going to describe someone who defines bearing witness, it would be him. I mean, here's a guy who, during the convoy, had the audacity to do a radical thing and go out to talk to people. Bearing witness indeed, and it's something that the mainstream media did not do. If they'd only spoken to those people, we wouldn't have got what Jason was talking about earlier. They're a bunch of Nazis, they're fringe, things like that, right? So I think about somebody like Francis Widdowson, who is, been arrested, thrown out of places for just speaking the truth. I don't know whether you noticed, but the other day at the Liberal convention, somebody walked up and told the same lie about Kamloops and people being buried in the ground. $12 million $20 a shovel. You can buy a lot of shovels with $12 million. In fact, I did the numbers on it. 600,000. You could dig up all of Kamloops with the amount of money they've spent, but they haven't dug a single hole. Now, I am new to this. I'm still growing, and I have a background from the previous world of bearing witness, a previous world that is lacking and dying, some and most might say, thankfully. And I checked in on YouTube. I checked the other day. I got on YouTube on December 16, 2007. I've only been active since really November 2024. I'm a retired radio announcer. I worked in radio and television for 35 years. My first job back in 1986. I'm getting older. I worked in Sarnia at CKJD. Some of you may know the name Sarnia. It's been in the news this week. A specific woman walked across the aisle and joined the Liberal Party. I worked in Chatham, Ontario. Back then, we actually played records on the radio. Long before the days of the internet and digital. Spent 20 years in Eastern Ontario working for CJSS, CFLG, CJUL radio. And I'm telling you this because I have an interesting perspective on bearing witness. I did a job called John Bolton's Cornwall Today, on a small market radio station, but I spoke with Stephen Harper, Dalton McGuinty, Jack Layton, Stéphane Dion, Elizabeth May, Justin Trudeau, Senator Ken Drysdale, astronauts, musicians, hundreds of people. I was destined to live here in Alberta. I was born in a place called Petrolia, Ontario. Sounds a lot like petroleum, one of the first places they found oil in Canada. People there who were born in Petrolia are called hard oilers. I lived in Sarnia, which I call my hometown, and as you know, a lot of Alberta oil goes to Sarnia, right? I moved here about 15 years ago. My wife lost her job. We decided a change was good, and I worked for some Calgary radio stations for a while. A fill-in talk show host. I did news, sports, traffic, and weather. And a few years ago, I left radio, but it definitely is not the same business that I worked in. I noticed a shift about 10 years ago. It was around 2018, 2019 when the Liberal government started funding the news media. Now, the news directors and management of the places I work for over the years would be disgusted with this. They would consider it a threat to editorial independence, an erosion of public trust, a risk of political favoritism. They would be disgusted that citizens would be forced to support news organizations that they may not agree with through their tax dollars and other things as well. These people and their beliefs, like me, are now gone. The news media line up like pigs at a trough for their government handouts. George Bernard Shaw said, "The politician that robs Peter to pay Paul will always have a friend in Paul." And that's what it's like with the news media these days. I also noticed a shift when it came to social issues. The young people who had been educated, or I guess indoctrinated in school, would cover stories that aligned with their worldview. Getting a contrary opinion for fairness and clarity wasn't even considered. Good journalistic practices like neutrality, fairness, objectivity, impartiality, integrity, and credibility has become less important. Advancing a narrative is more important these days. Now, I've been a moderator at debates, and it was tougher on the conservatives because everybody knew I was a conservative. I wanted to maintain my credibility. That was important to me. News media has lost credibility. The people in the news business today, groups of people protesting the latest woke cause is more important than thousands of people showing up for another thing. And I think of something that comes to mind, and I've heard COVID mentioned a number of times here today. Thousands of people would show up each Sunday during COVID at Central Memorial Park in Calgary to protest COVID restrictions and vaccine mandates. The radio station I worked at never showed up. I did. I covered it on my YouTube channel. Something I wouldn't even suggest to the news director at the radio station I worked at. They were busy pushing COVID restrictions and vaccine mandates. Central Memorial Park was less than 5 minutes by foot from the radio station I worked at. Then there was the woke indoctrination at work. Yearly training on proper business practices was replaced by long learning sessions on how to address people with their proper pronouns. Grievance sessions were held for all the proper intersectional groups, and they had 12 of them, and I can't even remember, but they had 12. This is what the modern media has become. So where did I begin with being a person bearing witness? And it's been a little bit of a journey to get here, but you might find this interesting. I thought it was around November of 2024. But I thought back in it, and I realized the power of YouTube in January of the same year. That year, we had a very long cold spell. You might remember. Temperatures in southern Alberta were in the minus 30s for a couple of weeks. I woke up one morning, it was minus 36 Celsius in Calgary. The whole province was under an extreme cold warning. The night before, we got an alert on our phone. Do you remember this? Conserve energy, we were told. Don't do laundry. Don't plug in your electric car or the power might fail. I picked up my phone and recorded a video. My channel at that point had about 400 subscribers. How in the heck could a province like Alberta, a province with more, and I said this, more energy than God, be in this predicament? I ranted about Rachel Nottry and coal-fired power, lashed out at the Trudeau government and the Liberal government, and wondered how such a blessed province could be at a point where, if the power went off for only a short time, millions of people would be at risk of freezing to death. Now, it doesn't take long for your house to get to minus 36 when it's minus 36 outside. I posted the video and forgot about it, but a few days later I looked, and 8,200 people had watched my video. And again, I had about 400 people watching my channel. Didn't post much late that year, but I think the Liberals were trying to ban plastic straws. I remember waving a plastic straw in front of my camera. The Liberals say if I throw this into a recycling bin or the garbage, it'll end up in the ocean. How the hell does this end up in the ocean? I live 14 hours from the ocean. And that's what I said. This is insane. If it goes into a recycling bin, I expect it to go recycling. If it goes into a garbage bin, I expect it to go to a landfill. If that's not happening, somebody needs to go to jail. And that's what I said. So I'm waving around this plastic straw, but it was December 21st, 2024, when I knew I was on to something. Short history lesson here. December 21st, 2024 was when Jagmeet Singh decided he was going to introduce a motion of non-confidence in the Liberal government. Now, Parliament went on Christmas vacation on December the 19th. Singh and the NDP propped up the Trudeau and the Liberals for years. Poilievre's riding high in the polls, next Prime Minister of Canada with a landslide. Nothing was going to come of what Jagmeet Singh decided to do here. Plus, Singh is just waiting things out to get his ironclad pension in February, worth millions, while seniors in Canada got peanuts from CPP for working for a lifetime. I was pissed. I did a short rant on this called, and I'm going to bleep out the word, I called it, Jagmeet Singh is the biggest piece of blank in Canadian political history. And I put it on my YouTube channel. So, more than 102,000 people have watched that video. My subscriber count at the time was 500. 102,000 people watched that video. Then I realized I had a voice. I didn't call it bearing witness, but I guess it was, and I was. Over the next several months, we know what happened. Trudeau resigned on January 6th, throwing the Liberals into a leadership campaign. Carney announced his candidacy on the 16th of January. Singh got his pension, probably ran to his Rolex authorized dealer to pick up a new solid gold Datejust. I'm sure he did. Carney won the leadership job, won the election, but this was a great time to bear witness. Suddenly, more people were subscribing to my channel. I was making a video a day on what I thought was interesting. Some videos would hit, others would miss, but I was doing my own thing with my own perspective. The election was great for followers. I was talking with the Fringe. It was good for him too. They started to go up fast. I was at 20,000. I was at 25,000. I was at 35,000, and wow, all of a sudden I was a YouTuber, and I'm 60 years old. People were looking for alternatives. They were looking for information they couldn't find on traditional media. They no longer trusted the media they grew up with. Now, this is where things get really bizarre. This is crazy. As I said, I worked in radio for 35 years, mostly in small market radio stations. My friend Scott, who was the best man at my wedding, and he was at my house a couple of years back when we renewed our vows, he gave me a call, and I was talking on the phone with him, and he, we generally would talk about daily life, but he asked me, what are you doing these days? He was the news director at the radio station I worked at for years, was in different business now. I said, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm semi-retired now. I'm in my 60s. And I did some radio here. He knew about that. I worked for a cycling organization for a time. But I told him I was a YouTuber. And he said, what? I said, I'm a YouTuber. I know it sounds weird, but I'm now a YouTuber. Well, thank you. He said, well, how many people subscribe to your channel? And at that point, it was about 40,000. He said, are you kidding? I said, no. And here's where it gets really bizarre. I told him that prior to the election, in the month or so before, when things were really humming along and there was lots of interest, more people heard me on my YouTube channel than had heard me in my entire 35 years on radio. And you could have heard a pin drop, just silence. And that is true. My channel is now within a few subscriptions from about 50,000. I am proof that we all have a voice. I'm proof that we can all bear witness, regardless of age, regardless of social status or income. I'm proof that we are the media. You have a mini television studio in your pocket. Radio and television people from 40 years ago when I started, they couldn't dream of such a thing. This is science fiction 40 years ago, ladies and gentlemen. Use this. Have a voice. Bear witness. Thanks very much to Jason and his wife for having me here. I do appreciate it. And you all have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, John reminded me about the plastic straws. They didn't want to get that near the ocean, did they? Neither are oil either. They won't let it get to the ocean. Maybe we're going to have to work on that one. So our next one is Ken Drysdale. How many of you are familiar with his work with the NCI? Talk about bearing witness. He sat there for days of testimony, hundreds of hours, across Canada, hearing stories and the emotional impact that it has on you. In fact, it's one of the chapters of the book, Bearing Witness, is vicarious trauma, because watching history is going to be harmful, hurtful, going to cause trauma as well. So how you deal with that. And don't be afraid of it. It's pretty normal. But sadly, he wasn't able to make it because of but weather. So he was going to drive out here with his wife, but couldn't make it. But he has sent us a video, and we'll go ahead and play that for you right now. Thank you.
Good morning. Rosalie and I are really saddened that we weren't able to join you live in Red Deer this weekend. The weather just didn't cooperate with us. It's truly an honor to stand before you today and speak on a subject that is not only timely, but deeply personal for many of us: bearing witness, truth, responsibility, and unity. Before I go any further, I want to begin with something I personally witnessed. Through my work with the National Citizens Inquiry, which many of you know as the NCI, I had the opportunity and sometimes the burden of sitting and listening to hundreds of Canadians come forward and share their experiences. These were not abstract discussions. These were real people. Doctors, scientists, parents, and injured individuals, professionals who risked their careers. Everyday Canadians who simply refused to remain silent spoke out. And as I sat there day after day, listening to testimony from across this country, one thing became very clear to me. We were documenting something that really mattered, not just for ourselves, but for history. We were capturing voices that might otherwise have been ignored, dismissed, or forgotten. And in doing so, we were bearing witness. But I also saw something else, something more subtle and something more concerning. Even within a movement grounded in truth, grounded in evidence, grounded in shared concerns, there were moments when division began to surface. Differences in approach, differences in emphasis, and differences in personalities. And I remember thinking at the time, if we're not careful, the very people who are united in truth can still become divided in how they carry that truth. And as I look today at what is happening in other movements, including the growing conversation around sovereignty in Western Canada, I see echoes of the same pattern, which is why this message is not just a reflection. It is in many ways a testimony and a friendly reminder. We are not just living through history. We are watching it unfold right in front of us. And more than that, we are witnesses to it. Bearing witness is not a passive act. It is not simply seeing something happen and moving on. To bear witness is to see clearly, listen carefully, record faithfully, and then, when necessary, speak truthfully. Even when it is uncomfortable, even when it comes at a cost, a true witness does not look away. A true witness does not remain silent, and perhaps most importantly, a true witness does not distort what they have seen. You know, over the past several years, many of us have been part of something extraordinary. Through the work of the National Citizens Inquiry and through the growing efforts of citizens across this country, we have seen something remarkable take place. We have heard testimony from doctors who raised concerns, families who suffered loss, individuals who experienced harm, professionals who were silenced, and Canadians who were punished simply for asking questions. We have not been dealing with rumors or speculations. We have been dealing with evidence. Hundreds of witnesses, thousands of pages of testimony, hours upon hours of recorded accounts. And through that process, something important happened. We preserved a record. We created a body of truth that cannot easily be erased. And in doing so, we fulfilled one of the most important roles in a free society. We bore witness. But bearing witness is not where the responsibility ends. In many ways, it is where responsibility begins. Because once you have seen something, once you know something, you cannot unknow it. And you are now faced with a terrible choice. What will you do with what you have seen? Will you represent it accurately, speak about it responsibly, share it with integrity? Or will you allow it to be shaped by emotion, by frustration, or by personal agenda? Because, you know, here's the truth. A witness who distorts what they have seen is no longer a witness. They become something else. We see that every day on our national media, don't we? And in doing that, they risk undermining the very truth they claim to defend. Now I want to turn to something more difficult, something that I believe we must address honestly and directly, because bearing witness is not just about what is happening around us. It is also about what is happening within us. When it was announced that I would be speaking here, I was inundated with texts and messages, some of them discouraging, some of them disparaging, not only about this conference, but about specific people who were a part of it. And I will tell you honestly that this was not new to me. Over the past 6 years or so, I have seen this again and again. And it is this pattern, this reflex towards criticism, division, and tearing down that I want to warn you about. Because within the broader movement that has grown out of these past years, we are seeing something concerning. We are seeing division, infighting, personal attacks, competing egos, fragmentation. We are seeing people who agree on the vast majority of issues turning on each other over the minority of differences. And I say this not as an outsider looking in, but as someone who has been deeply involved, who has worked alongside many of you, and who cares deeply about what we are trying to accomplish. You know, there's a powerful lesson found in the early writings of one of the greatest movements in history. This happened almost 2,000 years ago when this organization was struggling to establish itself. One of the leaders of that movement became aware of personal struggles and divisions within one of their communities, and so he wrote a letter to the members. They were dividing themselves. I follow this leader. No, I follow that leader. And the message in that letter was clear. You are missing the point. It was not a lack of truth that threatened them. It was the lack of maturity in how they lived it. You know, we need to ask ourselves a difficult question. Are we doing the same thing again today, 2,000 years later? Do we have people who agree on 90% of the issues, share the same concerns, desire the same outcomes, and yet are dividing over the remaining 10%? If that is the case, we must ask, what are we actually accomplishing? Because if we bear witness to the truth but destroy each other in the process, what exactly are we building? The danger of this kind of division is not theoretical. It has real consequences. It weakens our credibility. It confuses those who are watching, and it discourages those who are just beginning to ask questions, and ultimately strengthens those who would prefer that the truth never come to light. Because a divided voice is an ineffective voice, and a movement that turns inward on itself loses its ability to move forward. Before I move towards closing, I want to just take a moment to speak to you about a current issue that in many ways reflects exactly what I've been talking about today. This is the growing conversation around Western Canadian sovereignty, particularly in Alberta. You know, this is not a trivial issue. It is rooted in real concerns: economic disparity, federal overreach, resource control, representation in government, and a growing sense among many that their voices are no longer being heard. These are not imaginary grievances. They are being felt deeply by a significant number of Canadians. And as someone who spent considerable time studying this issue, I can tell you, there is both truth in the concerns and danger in how the conversation is unfolding. Because what we are seeing once again is fragmentation. We are seeing multiple groups, multiple strategies, multiple visions of what sovereignty even means. Some are calling for separations, others for autonomy within confederation, and others for reform. And instead of building a coherent, unified approach, we are seeing division, competition, and at times conflict within the very movement itself. And this is where the lesson becomes clear. Because regardless of where one stands on the issue of sovereignty, whether you support it, oppose it, or are still trying to understand it, the principles remain the same. If a movement cannot find unity around its core purpose, if it cannot conduct its internal disagreements with discipline and respect, then it weakens itself before it ever reaches the broader public. And perhaps, more importantly, it risks losing the very people it is trying to represent. This is not just a political lesson. It is a human one. Because once again, we are reminded truth alone is not enough. How we carry the truth, how we work with one another, how we handle disagreement will determine whether that truth has the power to move forward or whether it fractures and collapses under its own weight. We often speak about the importance of documenting what has happened, and that is critical. But I want you to consider something else. History will not only record what happened to us, it will record how we responded to each other. Did we conduct ourselves with integrity? Did we treat each other with respect? Did we remain focused on truth, or did we allow ourselves to be pulled into conflict, distraction, and division? Because future generations will not only ask, what did they stand for? They will ask, How did they carry themselves while they stood? So where do we go from here? If we truly bear witness, not just in word but in action, then we must hold ourselves to a higher standard. A true witness must be honest, disciplined, courageous, grounded in truth, and yes, respectful, even in disagreement. This does not mean we abandon conviction. It does not mean we avoid difficult conversations, but it does mean that we conduct these conversations in a way that strengthens rather than weakens what we are trying to build. Let me be clear. Unity does not mean uniformity. We will not all agree on everything, and that is not only acceptable, it is healthy. But we must learn to distinguish between differences that matter and differences that divide unnecessarily. Because we do not need perfect agreement, but what we need is shared purpose. As we reflect on what it means to bear witness, I want to leave you with this thought. Bearing witness is not just about exposing darkness. It is about becoming worthy to carry the light. It is about ensuring that the truth we have seen is reflected not only in our words, but in our actions, in our conduct, in how we treat one another. Because in the end, truth without integrity will falter, but truth carried with responsibility and unity will endure. Once again, Rosalie and I deeply regret that we weren't able to attend in person with you today. But we do send a message of hope and blessings with you, and we look forward to seeing you all soon. Have a great conference.
We wish he was here too. That's powerful, right? Right? You don't have to be, you need unification, but you don't have to be exactly the same. In fact, it's very healthy. And yeah, we get those too. Why is this person? Why is that person? Let's focus on the important things, sharing our messages and bearing witness. Now, some of the pastors needed to stand up. Who agrees with that? Some of them did. Some of them got arrested in the middle of the street, got pulled out of their parishes, and had to struggle. Some of them sat in front of a camera and started a podcast, like Citizen. You guys familiar with Citizen Podcast from the Miracle Network? David Craig? These are powerful conversations, and he's doing exactly what Ken says. Talk. Be respectful. Have the dialogue. And ensure that we continue to have these. Because you don't have to agree, but at least have the conversation. David? Really pleased that you're here with us today. What do you stand or hold it?
Great. Thank you, Jason. Oh, good morning, everyone. We're all still doing well? My grandma said our mind can only absorb what the butt can endure, so I want to make sure you guys are still doing good. Jason, thank you for putting us on again. And Paula, it's awesome to be able to gather with you guys. Some people I've been meeting for the first time. Some people I have met before. It's great to see some old friends here as well. You know, there's been so many great things so far that's been said today, and I'm hoping to build upon what Ken has said. But before we do that, I just want to let you know a little bit about who we are and what we do. My name's David Craig. I'm a pastor. I've been a pastor for about 15 years here in Calgary and Winnipeg. We pastor at a church called Springs Church. We're also involved in schooling. We have a kindergarten through grade 12 school called Springs Christian Academy, and that thing has been exploding because we've been trying our best to put power back in the hands of parents when it comes to education. And we're in the middle of yeah, thank you. It's began up by our family, started with my father-in-law. His name was Pastor Leon Fontaine, and right now we're in the middle of a massive build in Winnipeg just to accommodate the school and the amount of kids that are coming forward to it. We're also in media. I'm a media guy. I've been in media for about 15 years with Jason mentioned the Miracle Channel, but that's just one aspect of it. We've got 2 television channels in Canada that are fully licensed by the CRTC. Each one reaches about 5.5 million homes. One's called the Miracle Channel, which is a Christian network, but one's also called Merit TV, which is a mix of entertainment and news, and we got a lot of things happening there, so stay tuned on that. We also we're in podcasting. I love what Viva said, because I don't consider myself a podcaster, even though I've got a podcast. I don't consider myself a YouTuber, even though I'm on YouTube, right? You got all these things going. I'm not a journalist, right? Even though I love to seek truth and I'm super curious about what's going on. I want to let you know a little bit about our start that we had. And it goes back to convoy days. Is the convoy had passed through Winnipeg. And this is going back in whatever year it was, 2020, of February or March, I believe. And my wife is expecting our first child in about a month. And my father-in-law calls me and he says, you need to go to Ottawa. And I'm in Alberta. And I'm like, I don't want to go to Ottawa. I got a baby coming in a month. He goes, I think you should go. I think people need to know what's going on, and you guys should go experience it and see it firsthand. And so I called my brother-in-law, Jeremy. He's also on podcast and works very closely with me. We work together in all of this stuff. And I said, bro, you ready for an adventure? And he goes, yes. Let me ask my wife first, though. 8 a.m., and that was on a Wednesday morning. And then by about 6 hours later, we had our company vehicle all equipped and ready, and we're on the road, all ready to go to Ottawa to catch up to the convoy. And just, we don't know what's going to behold us. We have no idea what's happening. All we've heard is kind of rumors, and this thing is starting to get going. And then we end up catching up with the convoy, pick up a friend through Winnipeg, our journalist, who's also our producer on the Citizen podcast that we do. And we caught up with the convoy in Deep River, Ontario. Anyone heard of it? We heard of it when we pulled into it. And we, as we got there, believe it or not, the very first person that we connected with by accident who was on a Facebook Live, the first person, it was Tamara Leach, the very first person. If you go back and you scroll and find it, you can actually see us coming up to her, not knowing she's on a Facebook Live, interrupting her Facebook Live, asking her, hey, what's going on here? We have no idea. But when we got there, we went ahead and we got to Ottawa, and we ended up staying at a hotel right downtown. And our whole goal was just to be able to relate what we were seeing. We're not journalists. We're not professionals. We're just guys with thoughts, opinions, but we desire truth above all. I don't care where the truth comes from. I don't care. I'm not a partisan guy. I'm not a guy that I'm loyal to just because I'm loyal to a party for the sake of that. I'm loyal to truth, and I want truth no matter what. We want truth to flourish. And believe it or not, we were there for about 2.5 weeks to 3 weeks. We started an Instagram account there, and the Instagram account grew to about 65,000 in about a week and a half, because we were simply sharing our stories, walking the streets like Viva, came across Viva a couple times, letting people know what we saw and what we thought. That Instagram account got shut down by C18, by the way. So that's why we had to rebuild again. But that's where we got our start with journalism, with building out and pursuing truth. And with this idea, it's something that's been close to our hearts as we continue to do what we do. And something I want to talk about, and I thought Ken did a great job just before me going ahead and explaining the importance of how we do what we do. And I want to ask a question for a second. If you were to ask yourself, what makes a country strong? I'm sure we've got a bunch of different thoughts that will come to mind. There's several factors that makes a country strong, but it's not being unanimous in agreement. It's definitely not everybody thinking the same way. See, a strong country is one where the best ideas, they rise to the top because they've been tested and they've been challenged and they've also been proven in the open. And that's at least the country I want to live in. Whether that's Canada or whether Alberta does end up having Alberta independence, whatever country, we want the best ideas to rise to the top. Now, let me ask you a question. When was the last time that you've actually changed your mind about something important? Something that actually means. Like, not a small thing, something that matters. Because if we're honest, even in my life, I'm feeling it's harder to do so. Because people aren't just disagreeing anymore, right? We distrust, we dismiss, and we become a country that doesn't even listen anymore. We've moved from debate into echo chambers. And this is something that is detrimental in democracy and detrimental in countries when we become echo chambers. When people don't just believe something, they only hear things that reinforce what they already believe. And the result of that is we no longer talk with each other. We actually start talking past each other. Now, here's why this matters. Democracy does not work without tension. I'm a guy that I love tension. There's tension in every area of life. If you want to get stronger, you got to embrace tension. If you physically want to get stronger, If you're married, you know there's tension in marriage. There's tension between male and female. There's tension in work. There's tension everywhere we go, and tension is not a bad thing. Democracy does not work without tension. It doesn't work without disagreement, and it doesn't work without competing ideas being tested in the open. So I love this definition of democracy. It's a little basic, but it's true. Democracy basically means government by the people, of the people, for the people. But what happens when the people are stupid? See, when we're in echo chambers, when we're in echo chambers, we've got one side that will think the other side is stupid and that they're right. But the other side thinks the exact same thing. They think they're right and the other side is stupid. And when we're in echo chambers, we're just talking past each other and we're forgetting the flowering of truth that we all want. So when we get in this position, something has to change. G.K. Chesterton once said, the purpose of an open mind is the same thing as a purpose of an open mouth. It's to shut it again on something solid. See, that's the process we should be going through, is that you open, you test, you refine, and then you land on something better. But if you never hear the other side, we have nothing to refine. We just get louder and we don't get wiser. So I want to ask the question, how do we get here? Part of this is our human nature. Part of this is kind of how we're wired and we're built, that we like to be right? We like being comfortable. We like being around people who agree with us, because if you're like me, it makes me feel good if I say something, right? It's a huge temptation of public speakers to say things to a crowd to get hoots and hollers and get them active, because it makes you feel better as a public speaker. My grandpa used to always say, you don't want to throw candy to an already diabetic crowd. You want to leave them walking away with something that actually makes them better. But the interesting thing about how we got here is you look at technology. Technology has actually poured gasoline on the instinct that's already inside of us as humans. See, algorithms, the thing about algorithms in our social media, they do not care about truth. They actually just purely care about engagement. They care about feeding you what you already like so that you can get more and more engagement. More of what you already agree with, more of what keeps you scrolling. And before you know it, listen up to this, before you know it, you're actually not informed, you're simply affirmed. There's a big difference between informed and being affirmed. And a lot of us, I've fallen for this trap a lot in my life. And those are not the same thing. See, this is where the media, this is the area I've been in for 15 years as a media executive in Canada. I know the industry. I know it inside and out. I've been in every single room that has to do with the CRTC, to government, to how to manage channels, to how to grow, to watch trends go down. And believe it or not, trends are going back up when it comes to television and cable in Canada. Media was meant to be a pillar of democracy. It's actually meant to be a watchdog, a place where truth could be pursued, it can be tested, and it can be challenged. Some call it the fourth estate, some call it the fifth estate with the digital era. Either way, the role is supposed to be clear, not to tell you what to think, but to help you think better. To present ideas, to challenge power, and to expose corruption, and to allow truth to rise to the top. See, Winston Churchill said, a lie gets halfway around the world before the truth has a chance to get its pants on. See, this is what we saw when we were in Ottawa. You know how my brother-in-law Jeremy and I decided to cover stories as we weren't journalists, but we tried to figure out, when we showed up, we're like, we have no idea what to do. I'm like, there's a semi-truck parked right there in front of Parliament Hill. I jumped up, started talking to the guy. He spoke French. I don't speak French, so I had to move on to the next guy just to start getting stories. But what we started to do after 2 or 3 nights there is we would literally watch the media on CBC or CTV at night and see the stories that they were putting out. And we found that, and I'm not exaggerating here, but we found that the stories that were being put out was actually the complete opposite of what we were seeing on the ground. So we started getting our cue from that. Okay, they're reporting on that. Let's go show people what we're actually seeing. But it's amazing how lies can travel so fast and truth doesn't travel too fast. And that was also before, when Winston Churchill said that, that was before social media. And now that lie has a jetpack. The interesting thing is, though, when media fails, and we maybe can argue we've seen that in Canada, we've seen that in the Western world, citizens are the ones that pay the price. It's you and I. When media becomes biased, when it becomes captured, and also when it becomes lazy and agenda-driven, citizens end up losing because you're not getting information. You're getting narratives. I'm really proud of our team. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of Bridge City News, which is in Southern Alberta. That's also part of what we do. Bridge City News. And we're very proud of that team that's down there because they've actually grown larger than CTV locally down there and global in Southern Alberta. Because we try to give people information. We don't try to give narratives. We try to show both sides. We try to give even platforms so that we believe citizens, when are informed, have got the ability to make the right decisions. They can judge for themselves where they land on something. But when all you get is narratives, we tend to stop thinking critically. And we start picking teams, right? Once you're on a team, everything becomes about winning. It doesn't become about truth. That's an important thing to remember. But this is why independent media matters so much right now. But at the same time, we have to be very careful that it doesn't fall for the same trap that mainstream media has fallen for. To just simply be an echo chamber of what we think is right because we're around people who think the same as us. Because when independent media is actually doing what it's supposed to do, it creates a proper space. It creates a space for real conversations, for disagreements. If you ever watched our show, my brother-in-law and I, we love to disagree. We love to go back and forth. And if we don't disagree, we will try to choose to disagree with each other because we love playing devil's advocate. I wish you could be one of our family gatherings. My wife's family is quite large. We got 13 grandkids under 11, and there's 10 adults, and you got grandparents. It's an absolute zoo when we get together. But if our sister-in-laws or brother-in-laws bring things up, even if I agree with them, I'll say, how do you know that? Where's that information from? Or I'll challenge him and just play devil's advocate because we like the idea of actually getting down to the crux of a thought or where is that founded upon. See, I believe independent media can create space for ideas that don't fit neatly into party lines. We have a lot of ideas that are like that right now. Independent media doesn't have to protect legacy institutions or political relationships or corporate narratives. You're independent for a reason. It can ask better questions. It can platform different voices, and it can actually serve the public, not manage them. But here's a hard truth I think a lot of us might have a hard time swallowing, is we can't just blame the media. Is that part of it is on us as citizens in the country. You know, a friend of mine, Conrad Black, said a statement to me a long time ago, and he said, we get the government that we deserve. Now, we can debate that all we want. I think there's a real fundamental truth underneath that. I'll also add to what he said, we get the media ecosystem that we tolerate. If we don't demand better, we won't get better. If we don't seek truth, guess what? You're not going to find truth. I'll say this in a way I think a lot of us can understand. How many people are in fantasy football, fantasy hockey? Not the crowd. There's not one person here. I'm in 9th place right now in my fantasy hockey, just so you know. Working hard. I got like 2 games left to get the first. It's not going to happen this year. More and more conversations I have, I love connecting with people. I live in Calgary. I love talking to people wherever I go, asking them their thoughts on politics, what's happening in our country. What do you think about Alberta independence? All ages, doesn't matter what their background is, where they come from. I love to know what people think. And through my friendship groups, people I'm around, the unfortunate trend that I have seen is that there are people in this country that know more about their fantasy football stats, their fantasy football teams, their hockey teams, than they actually know what's happening in our country. Like, you know, injury reports, you know, trade rumors, you know, depth charts, you know, who's good, who's not good, who's questionable, who's out for that game. But if you ask them what bill is being debated in Parliament, most of us on average, obviously it's not this room because you guys are the elite in Canada. I know that. But if you ask most people in Canada what's being debated, a majority of the people would not know what's happening. You get crickets from them. And here's the problem. If we don't take responsibility as citizens, we do not take the ability to respond to the situations. See, the problem is the fantasy football teams and all the knowledge that we have, it doesn't actually affect our Mondays. It doesn't affect our Tuesdays. But what goes through in government, when you look at bills C9, you look at C18, you look at C22, you look at all of these different bills that are being talked about and potentially pushed through, that actually affects our Monday. It actually affects my 4-year-old and my 4-month-old 20 years down the road, their Mondays. These things matter in our life. See, government policy talks about taxations and regulations and freedom of speech and education and healthcare. And that stuff is going to hit you and I whether we are paying attention or we're not. So the idea of us as citizens that we can be uninformed, that's completely gone. And this is where Media, independent media, can play such an important part. But guess what? If you don't want to pick up a microphone, if you don't want to pick up a camera, you don't know what to do, there is this proverbial dinner table conversation that's going on in our country. That if you know what's going on, you can have one-on-one conversations with people. Ask them what they think. Be respectful. I always say, speak truth in love. Love isn't soft, but speaking truth in love. And that actually shifts the needle when you've got thousands and millions of citizens that are informed and having conversations. See, we need a shift in this country. We need citizens who are willing to listen to people that they disagree with. Is that a novel thought? To ask better questions, to refuse to live in an echo chamber. And we need a media that is willing to challenge its own assumptions. That's a tough thing to do because a lot of times we're so dedicated to what we think. To host real debate and to prioritize truth over clicks. We had a friend join us. Actually, we have a lot of friends that join us on our show. And the common thing that we get when people see our podcast, and we often get, oh, your studios look so nice. You guys, yeah, we do TV well. We understand all that stuff. But the common thing we get is, I thought you guys would be bigger. Meaning more followers, right? We got modest numbers, but we've never cared about the follows. We've never cared about the numbers. Luckily, we're in a position where we don't have to be able to force to grow that. But one of the ways that you can grow is by, as I said earlier, throwing candy to an already diabetic crowd. And one thing that we always try to do is we try to have real conversations that aren't sexy, but yet it's fostering debate. It's fostering and challenging ideas. It's trying to allow truth to flourish. And when you do that, yeah, it might not be sexy in terms of growth and all the social media likes or getting all the attention, but I believe that actually makes a real difference in people's lives because we're actually choosing to pursue truth. We need media that's willing to do that because the best ideas don't come from one side of the aisle, believe it or not. They rise to the top when both sides are engaged. Democracy requires multiple parties who think differently, who have an ability to connect and talk with each other. And if you agree to disagree, great, but we all are participating in the flowering of truth. And when we lose that, we lose a country. A healthy democracy is not one where everybody agrees. It's one where people can disagree and still pursue the truth together. Where ideas are actually tested, where they're not silenced, and where conversations happen, not cancellations. See, independent media is a solution, but it's not the whole solution. It is a critical piece because without it, the conversation, it definitely shrinks. And when the conversation shrinks, so does our country. So the question I have is, what do we actually want as citizens? You and I are all citizens here in Canada. At the end of the day, I believe it's simple. We want truth to flourish. We want the best ideas. We want ones that actually work. We want ones that produce real results in our lives that we actually can see a day-to-day difference. We want those ideas to rise to the top, not because they might come from the right, politically right, or they might come from the politically left, but because they are true and they work. And that only happens when ideas are tested, when they're challenged, when they're refined, and when they're debated in the open. That requires, guess what? Requires courage on our behalf, to be willing to be wrong, to be able to admit, I was wrong. It took me 10 years of my marriage to admit I was wrong to my wife, just so you know. It requires all of us to step out of the echo chamber that we might be in. Because if we don't just lose good conversation, we actually lose our ability to function as a country. If we only listen to voices that echo us, you and I, we may feel stronger, but we actually become weaker. Because truth doesn't grow in isolation, it actually grows in tension. I'm saying it one more time. Truth does not grow in isolation. It grows in tension. And that's why we're so passionate about what we're doing here at Citizen, Bridge City News, and everything that we're building. Our goal is simple. Not to tell people what to think, but to make sure that you have access to ideas that matter, to people who've got good thoughts, people that disagree, because informed citizens, they don't just react to a country, they help shape it. So it's amazing to see all the people that have been adding to this conversation. And I know just in a little bit, we're having a man that is going to say everything I just said, but way better and way more eloquent and with way more wisdom than myself come up shortly. But I wanted to also say a line about the next speaker because Stockwell Day, is a man that there are few people in this country who have seen leadership from as many angles as someone like he has. And he brings experience and perspective and wisdom I think we all need right now in our country. I'm also thankful not just to respect him, but also to call him a friend. But in a moment, he's going to come up, and I'm going to bring up Jason back to the stage. Thank you, guys.
The purpose of this conference is to encourage some of you to actually get involved. Pick up a camera, pick up a microphone, and get involved. And this is why we're sharing what we know, what we learned, the lessons that we learned, some of the good and the bad. We don't sugarcoat, but I can certainly tell you what David said there is if you get into this, you're going to hit a crossroad pretty early. Do I want to gain a bunch of followers and just give people more slop? Because you could. Or do you want to take the harder road and just tell the truth? It's a tougher road. But when you do that one, the audience that you attract are the good ones. They are loyal. They know that you'll make mistakes. They don't always agree with you, but they know what your journey is, and that's truth. Now, some people were asking me, well, why Stockwell Day? He has a podcast. He's doing exactly what we're trying to do here today. And you'll see that everybody that is on this stage for you today got a podcast, a billboard, a microphone, or they're doing something, or they write for a news organization or media. What is it called now? Media, news? It's kind of getting confusing. But Stockwell has one. It's called Day to Day podcast. So go ahead and check that one out. Stock? I get to call him Stock now because he said that on one of our episodes. And one of the things I got to tell you about this gentleman is I reach out to politicians all the time because you never know who's going to say yes. I get more no's or ignores than yeses. But 12 minutes after reaching out to this gentleman, he said, yeah, sure, let's do an interview. So Stock, thank you very much.
Okay, yeah, I'll move that, yes. Well, thank the applause for Jason. He is deserving of that. Great to see, great turnout here. Saturday, is there nothing else going on in Red Deer? Wow, this is amazing, very encouraged. And I want to tell you, it doesn't go there, all right. We've been given clear guidelines here, 20 minutes, and I appreciate that. So I want you to know that I have a giant clock here, and it starts running when I tap that, gives the 20. When it hits 20 minutes, I want you to know it's going to mean nothing to me at all. We will keep on going, but a very wise move made by Jason to put something in check for a recovering politician here. Lunch is coming next. So every minute over 20 I go, I know the growls I hear are from your stomach and from otherwise. Great to see Pastor Jakin here, and great guy. If you haven't met him and his wife and this beautiful church, I can tell you this church was always not like this beautiful building and the campus here. But the spirit, the heart, and the love of this church has always been here through him, through his dad. And we appreciate being allowed to use this fabulous facility. Thank you so much. I have to say, I know some of the speakers here, I won't take time to congratulate each one of them. They're way ahead of me as far as in the world of podcasts. I kind of just stumbled into this a little while ago, and I was been quickly censored and suppressed and all kinds of things. So I'm just getting some things figured out. On the technical side, it's a little rough around the edges, but I get my grandkids to help me. They do that quite regularly. So what I've done, though, I did check. I went on AI because somebody said, that's quite a group that's coming to that function there of Jason's. And just the fact that Jason's doing it alone is scary enough. So I thought, well, I better check before I call Jason back and check on some of the names. I just fed the names into AI and said, tell me, what do we got here? And this is actual stuff right from AI. Okay, so I won't put the names to the actual comments. I'll let you try and imagine who's attached to whom when you look at the list of speakers. Well, here we go. This is the nasty things. The people who are speaking here, the nasty things they do. Are you ready? As media types. Gives space to disputed views. Oh no. Can you believe that? Somebody giving space to disputed views. Wouldn't you like to see that on CBC instead of the monolithic approach they always take? How about this one? normalizes controversial positions. Oh, I hate that. Normalizing it. This one, honestly, I put the phone or I put the AI down and I laughed at this next one here. Are you ready for this? Does not mirror mainstream ideological balance. Well, I thought that would get you too. You know, like all our mainstream media does, they absolutely present ideological balance. So I love that one. How about this one? She shares insensitive views. Oh no, not another one. How do you gather people like this? Ready? His commentary creates tension in communities. It's unbelievable, this list. Now, this last one, I kid you not, this is what it says. You can decide who it attaches to, all right? His name appears consistently in obituaries. That I'm not making it up. That's for real. And all I'll say is, you know who you are. So I read through that list and I said, that's my people. I'm going. And so I thank Jason so much for the invitation here. So I'd like to talk about, and I will try and keep an eye on the clock because I know we're coming up to the noon hour. I'd like to kind of break this into 4 sections, each one being about an hour. The first, I'd like to talk about where we are. Then I'd like to talk about how did we get here? And then what's it done to us? And how do we get out of here? So on the first section, we can see where we are just by looking at any number. I'm just picking 3 here of events or situations. We're in a situation where, as I attended the National Day of Prayer or the National Prayer Breakfast in Ottawa, some of you were there just recently. And it's a great event. Politicians all come to it. And it was this year was the biggest ever, 1,600 people there. And at that event, the political leaders all show up. We started one here in Alberta a number of years ago, and I was involved in that. And so I would get to suggest to the other leaders what verses they might want to read. I wouldn't tell them, but some of them weren't that familiar with some of the verses. And so at that time, the leader of the Socialist Party, the NDP, he was actually a good friend of mine. He sent a note to me in the legislature, said, what verse should I read? And I sent him out of Ecclesiastes 10:1, or sorry, I sent him out of, Ecclesiastes 10:1. And it says, someone's chuckling already, it says, the heart of the wise takes him to the right. The heart of the fool takes him to the left. It says that, don't get mad at me. Don't get mad at me. It's in the Bible. And he looked up at me in shock, and then he laughed, and I gave him a thumbs up and said, no, you don't have to read that one. But where are we at today? The Prime Minister of our country was there and read from the Bible. And within 24 hours, the mandate that he had given to the Liberal caucus was carried out in a vote called C9, which is to potentially ban large sections of the Bible. Now, that's within 24 hours of him reading from the Bible, from verses that might be offensive to me, and now I have the law, I could maybe charge him. That's really, it's an astonishing situation. We are in a situation where not that long ago, and you saw it in the news, in British Columbia, a father actually did jail time because he did not agree with a judge that he would follow the rules of the people in social services and in the school who were about to take his daughter into transition surgery, which involved removing, as you know what. And he said, Your Honor, no, I cannot be part of that. He actually spent time in jail for that. So we see where are we at. And some of you are aware, just recently in Chilliwack, a school board member who had a difference of opinion about the philosophy relative to gender in the school was taken to Human Rights Tribunal. It was a long-fought battle, and he's been assessed. It hasn't been changed. There's no appeal, apparently. $750,000 fine. for doing that. When the media, even the media, were shocked at the severity of that, they called and they said to the person who was representing the tribunal, $750,000. Like, serial killers don't get that in Canada. And he was told, yeah, and he got off light. Like, how did we get here? But this is where we're at. You've heard articulated here different circumstances. We could go on day and day. How did we get here? I want to do a fast history course here. There's a number of reasons that explain why we got here. I want to talk about something called cultural Marxism. Some of you know what that is. We are largely, in terms of the high towers of our academe today and media, we are in a place of the strongholds of cultural Marxism. Karl Marx, and I'm not talking about, the comedian Groucho. I'm talking about Karl Marx. At the end of the 1800s, he wrote a number of works that were hugely influential. It's a whole different study and discussion on why those are influential, why they were so timely. But basically, Karl Marx is very clear in his manifesto, some things that have to be done to bring in the perfect society, to bring in the perfect utopia. You're going to have to do some things. And these were taken and followed by communist countries and whoever thought that they would actually invade the thought life and the practices of modern democracies. Number one, God is irrelevant. Not just irrelevant, God cannot be permitted. You have to take God right out of the social equation. Number two, the family is a man-made construct designed just to control people. And so we have to redefine what a family is. We have to break it down. And then if you don't have family, you certainly don't need things like homes, your own private homes. So private property, very much diminished in communist and in many socialistic venues. And if you don't need to be able to earn a salary and work hard and get the benefits of that to buy a home for your family, well, we don't need the private sector, really. And so what we really do need is a few really smart elite technocrats to decide what areas the population should be working in and to assign those out. Now, to do all this, it's going to require a revolution. Not only that, in the process of the revolution and establishing this perfect utopia, there's going to be some people who are brave enough to stand up and say, I don't think so. Those people have to be eliminated. They have to, we call it cancellation now. They have to, and that was physical elimination, preferably in the public square where it was very visible to hundreds and thousands of people. You just have to shoot or hang a few people in the public square. Everybody else backs out in fear, as is happening in Iran right now. And these are the basic tenets. And why do you have to kill these people? Why do you have to cancel people who see things differently? Largely it's because the leaders of a culturally Marxist world are selling, and what they're saying is we want the perfect utopia. So people who are opposing that are actually harmful to this common group of people, to this commonwealth. And we don't want people hurting the commonwealth, so they have to be eliminated. And the use of force was actually something that was extolled. It was valued. Karl Marx got that idea from one of the people who had the French Revolution. And there were some genuine grievances in the French Revolution, but the man by the name of Robespierre, who was responsible for the policy of quite literally beheading about 30,000 people within the course of about 11 months. Think about that. I think about beheading. Not the only group that thinks about that. But he actually said, and he wrote about this, he talked about this, there is a virtue to terror. There's a virtue to it. Why? Because you're protecting this beautiful new world that we're trying to create. And you've got to eliminate the people who are trying to hurt our world. And that's where we are today, folks. Marxism or the use of it in the Soviet Union, eventually that fell. But communist countries all follow this to a T, and many people in democratic countries who really sincerely think we have to have this beautiful utopia follow the same principles. Think about it in our schools, in our government programs. No God, that's got to be eliminated. take that out. The family's got to be reconstructed. That's gone. You've got to get rid of that. Being able to earn your own keep and make money, private sector, that's got to be taken out. What do you need homes for, individual private property, if you don't have family? And yeah, it's going to be a revolution. And you know what? People who oppose it, they're going to have to be eliminated. They're going to have to be canceled very publicly to scare others off. I know a little bit about what that is. So that's how we got here. One of the reasons, there's others, but broadly speaking, and what's that done to us is created this culture of fear. We're afraid to speak up because, you know, someone will look at me. I've had it brought to my attention. I spoke on an issue on CBC a few years ago and said, no, Canada is not systemically racist. We've got some racist goons in our country, folks. Canada, however, is not systemically racist, period. And for that, and for saying, I know what bullying feels like. I was a teenager once too. I was the first kid in my class back in the, back when I was 13, so that's got to be, 40 years ago. I was the first one. It wasn't a status system there where braces were cool. They were very uncool. Railway tracks in your mouth and thick glasses and going to school every day and guys telling me girls don't make passes at guys who wear glasses and being mocked daily. I do know what that's about. Not to the same extent as some other people maybe, but for those comments, cancellation. Folks, these things are very, very effective at shutting people up. I was talking to a young woman not long ago. She plays community rugby. And there is, and this is among young women like in their 20s, and there's a man playing on the women's team. Aren't you glad the Olympic Committee, somebody prayed somewhere for have them to say women against women, men against men, will do a biological test, but it hasn't hit this particular city and this particular rugby league in our province. And she talks about what the man who calls himself a woman does when they're, playing rugby is a pretty touch and feel kind of game. And she talks about what he takes pleasure in doing. And but so I said, why don't you say something? Well, no, I don't want to upset. How about her dad? Where are the dads? Right? But it's this thing of fear. We're afraid we're being canceled. My time is ticking. I'm trying to speed up here. So what do we do? First of all, as you've heard so eloquently, we have to speak the truth. Speak the truth in love. It tells us in Ephesians, if you don't mind me quoting the Bible, but be prepared to pay the price. That's a key factor here. You have to be prepared to pay the price. And when speaking the truth, as far as possible, speak the truth in love. If you're going to a school council meeting, school board meeting to raise an issue, as far as possible, speak the truth in love, or at least respectfully. When you lose it at the mic and start shouting back at the people who are sitting up there, that's the clip that will always be shown. And you lose some of the effect. Now, that's not always possible. Sometimes it's so frustrating, it makes you so angry, you have to be a little more forceful. But as far as you can, speak the truth in love. I made a documentary about what had happened on October 7th. It was funded by Jewish groups in Toronto and by a Christian media outlet in the United States. On that particular documentary, we're at the Hadassah Hospital, and they're talking about the first wave of victims coming in from that concert down near where the kibbutzes were. And the woman who's been the head surgeon there for women, she talked about how when the first waves of victims are coming in, some dead, some still alive, with some of them it was difficult to identify if they were male or female. And folks, not because they'd gone in for transgender surgery. This is an experienced surgeon. That's how vicious and outrageous it was what happened to these women. And then she looks straight into the camera. You can check it out. You can see it on YouTube. It's been suppressed, but it's still there. And she says, with not a loving voice, she says, where are the feminists? Where are they when these atrocities happen? So there's times it's easier to speak in love. There's times it's not. But as far as you can, Speak the truth in love when you're addressing these issues, because you never know what the person's been fed. When you have the opportunity to talk to a mom who's about to be persuaded to have her daughter or maybe son go into surgery for transgender reasons. Look, don't you appreciate what Premier Smith has done on that issue? It's amazing. You know, she has said, look, we respect the rights of anybody to choose what they will. Any adult, we respect that right. But children, no. They won't be subjected to surgery. They won't be subjected to pharmaceuticals. We lovingly counsel them to wait, at least till they're adults. How anybody could not vote for her just on that alone, I don't know. But if you're talking on that topic, you have to remember these parents, moms or dads, they've been lied to. They've been told if their kids are not allowed to just move unquestionably into transition, physical transition, they're at the risk of becoming suicidally intentional. Folks, the facts are very clear. It's a higher degree of suicidal intention among those kids who have gone through it, rather than the ones who are lovingly counseled to wait. And other countries are also canceling that, but not Canada. We just forge right on. So be aware, sometimes the person you're talking to may have been told, quite a pack of lies. And then we've already heard it addressed here and very eloquently. You're going to have to work in politics with people you don't always agree with 100%. And at the first sign of disagreement on this or that item, do you want to jettison the whole thing? Do you want to splinter off into groups which will always allow the collectivists? People on the left think more collectively than we do. We get all high and mighty about individual freedoms, as we should. But you're going to have to work and vote sometimes with people you don't agree with. The only political party that will ever exist is the one that Jason and I are going to form. Other than that, there's not going to be a perfect one. So keep these things in mind. We have to be willing to do this. And I'm really coming close to the 20 mark in a matter of seconds here. And folks, where we can politically, we need to starve out funding that shouldn't be happening. Just one example alone, you look on my video, you'll see the picture of a 6-year-old girl in Gaza, Palestinian girl, 6 years old. Her teacher is saying to her, "What do you want to do when you get older?" She pretends she has a knife and she goes, "I want to kill a Jew." That's in the school system. And our government funds the United Nations Work Relief Agency that gives money to that school system. It's okay to lovingly call your member of parliament and say, please stop funding that group. There are things we have to do. There are things we have to stand up and face. And some are going to pay the price. Many are paying the price in Iran today as we stand here. Many are paying the price here in Canada. Speak the truth in love. Be prepared to pay the price. And for those of you who are people of faith, and I used to say this on our own caucus, we'd have a big issue facing us, and I'd say, okay, for those of you who are people of faith, don't forget to pray. And then I'd add, and even if you aren't people of faith, this is such a big issue, you should pray anyway. Keep these things in mind, folks. We can see these things turn around, but it's if you're willing to stand up, push back the fear, and speak the truth in love. Thank you for being willing to do that.
But one of the best types of courage is the ones that sacrifice themselves, and they do it because it's the right thing to do. Our next speaker is a perfect definition of courage. Whether it's the yelling at her, the swearing at her, behind the scenes pushing her husband as well. And all she's doing is trying to open herself up to conversation. She doesn't have any firearms or weapons. She's not trying to force anything on anybody. She's quite literally making herself available to talk. And for that, she gets pulled out by the police, drums beat into her by her head, which isn't a type of a battery, by the way. Like, those hurt. And does she just pack things up and go home and say, woe is me? No. She goes right back. Why? Because truth is super important to her. She believes in it. And she believes that if we continue to have a society that's built on lies, dishonesty, cover-ups, ignorance, then you're going to get what you pay for. So this is the type of courage that comes in a small package, willing to put herself out there and take the hits that many won't. So I hope she inspires you to go ahead and do the same type of thing, stand up and speak, show up to events, and don't be afraid. Francis.
Thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me to come here to give you some of my words of wisdom on how to live in the current climate. I find the title of this conference to be quite fitting, Bearing Witness, which I guess I've been doing for the last several years, but certainly within the last 5 or 6 years. And my motto is constant pressure. You put constant pressure on the system, and you take it as far as you can within the current framework, and you expect the institutions to act like they should, and when they don't, you document that so that future generations can understand the destruction of our institutions and where we all went wrong in trying to maintain things like academic institutions, which is my area. And the destruction of our universities is a tragedy, because universities play a very, very important role in a democratic society, and they really have 3 very, very important functions. People often think of them as, sort of areas where intellectuals get together and pursue the truth, which is correct. That's what universities are, is truth-seeking institutions. But universities are where knowledge is disseminated to the younger generation and to the public. And if we're failing as universities, the level of knowledge is going to be seriously corroded. And I think we're seeing that throughout society, is that we just do not have the quality of knowledge that we used to have before the universities were taken over. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is the professionals. The universities are where professionals are trained. And if they are being trained by ideologues, then your doctors, your lawyers, your teachers are not going to be able to be fulfilling the responsibilities that they need to be fulfilling in a democratic society. And the third very, very important function is that universities, because they're supposed to be truth-seeking institutions, historically have been a bulwark against authoritarianism. And if you look at an authoritarian regime like Nazi Germany, that was one of the first targets of that regime, was to remove professors and have, sort of those that were compliant to the regime installed. And that makes the, authoritarian types of tendencies become that much stronger. And I think we are really seeing that happen now in Canadian society. And totalitarianism is looming. And we're not being disappeared in the middle of the night, but that will come unless we fight now and fight hard. And, people are talking about courage. Well, yeah, I get screamed at various events, but, no blood has been shed so far. And, George Orwell got shot in Spain fighting the fascists. So if George Orwell can go through such things without complaint, being yelled at and called some names, it's really not that big a deal. Anyway, this destruction of the universities, it seems like it's been relatively recent, but it really has been unfolding since the 1960s. And the 1960s is when postmodernism began to be entertained. And for people who don't know what postmodernism is, it is a relativistic philosophy where subjective beliefs take precedence over the objective search for truth. And that happened. And as a result of that, we had a number of programs begin to take root in the universities, which are known by a number of different names. I believe it's James Lindsay and Helen Pleckrose called it grievance studies. I prefer the term advocacy studies. So they weren't academic programs. They were arguing for a particular political position, usually on behalf of the oppressed or people perceived to be oppressed. And this is what's known as identity politics. So the identities of groups that perceive to be oppressed must be affirmed. And that is how those groups, it's argued, will be able to overcome their oppression. But what happens is a lot of very irrational ideas begin to be affirmed, which is a direct threat to the truth-seeking character of the institution. And this gained a foothold. And they were always a marginal kind of part of the university until the 2010s. And that's when they took over the machinery. And you saw this in equity, diversity, and inclusion offices in the universities. And Stockwell Day, when he was giving his talk, he would refer to this as cultural Marxism. And I don't think that's the case. This is a corporate initiative. And what it tries to do, it argues for proportionate representation of identity groups within management. And so if you've got 7% of Aboriginal people in Alberta, 7% of the professors, 7% of the students, 7% of the managers and bureaucracies should be Aboriginal, is the argument. And in order for that to happen, you've got to lower the standards, because you're not hiring on the basis of merit, you're hiring on the basis of identity characteristics. And to disguise that, you say that these groups have their own ways of knowing. And that disguises their absolute incompetence and inability to do the job properly. And that's what I saw at Mount Royal University, which is the university I was wrongfully terminated from in 2021, because I do not accept the idea of Indigenous ways of knowing, which was being put forward to disguise the lower standards for Indigenous students and Indigenous professors. And as a result of that, I was pushed out of the university by an academic mob. And my case is currently before the Alberta Labor Relations Board, and I must be reinstated at Mount Royal University. And they say I can't be because of the friction that is caused by me criticizing things that people don't want to criticize. And if I can't be reinstated, universities are over in Canada. And so we're working hard to make sure that I'm not going to be canceled forever. But it's not just Mount Royal University that is being destroyed. It's across the country, and I've been going across the country to a number of different universities. You might have seen me at University of British Columbia and University of Victoria, Thompson Rivers University, University of Winnipeg, which was one of the more kind of crazy scenes of Indigenous gangsters that showed up. My cameraman feared for his life that day. That's how bad it was. 8 911 calls were made to the police. They never showed up. And we're still trying to get to the bottom of that. And the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms has been doing great work in representing me with a number of these institutions, trying to hold them to account. And we were in court yesterday. I'm not sure people knew that, but the Justice Center, Glenn Blackett, the incredible lawyer for the Justice Center, we were taking the University of Lethbridge. It's been 3 years where we've been waiting to take them to court for the cancellation of my talk on February 1st, 2023. And we found out some really interesting things yesterday. The first is that the university on January 26th had said that I would be allowed to give the talk because of the free speech policy. And then within 24 hours, it changed its mind. And that's a very interesting question as to why that is the case. And it appears that the reason is they met with an administrator, an activist administrator by the name of Leroy Littlebear, who is an absolutely toxic person who is in charge of the indigenization initiative at University of Lethbridge. And when I went back there in February 4th, 2026, which is a couple months ago, where I had students holding up cell phones saying, "We hope your ears bleed," because they were drumming so hard in the back of my head. Leroy Little Bear said that the students did a fantastic job in neutralizing me. That's what he said. That is an administrator from the University of Lethbridge that said this. He should be gone. Why is he there? Anyway, I wrote a letter to the Premier and the Minister of Advanced Education about this. They are doing nothing about the University of Lethbridge. That absolute disgrace of an institution. Why are they not enforcing their free speech directive that they put on universities in 2019? And I still don't have an answer to that, but hopefully we will have some accountability from the University of Lethbridge in the near future. So there's legal and political initiatives that have been going on, that the Justice Center and trying to lobby the politicians to do something about the university situation. But really the problem is a cultural one in universities. It is that the pursuit of truth in universities has been completely destroyed, and the professors who are in charge and have taken over the unions, which is another major problem, do not think that that should be the goal of universities. They think that universities are there to empower groups that perceive to be oppressed. And if that means that the pursuit of truth has to be sacrificed, well, that's a small price to pay in their view. So that is the huge problem that we're facing. And in order to combat that problem, one has to go and bear witness to what's happening in the universities. And I've been doing that a couple of ways. The first is to go in with what's called spectrum and street epistemology, which was a method developed by Peter Boghossian, who's was pushed out of Portland State University. And what you have 7 maths going from the strongly agree to the strongly disagree to the neutral. You lay out these maths on the ground, and you have contentious claims that you put forward. And the claim that, of course, is my closest to my work is the claim is that the remains of 215 children have been confirmed at the former Kamloops Indian Residential School. That's the claim. And you get people to stand on the mat that they best thinks represents their degree of certainty. And if they say strongly agree, you ask them why they strongly agree. Why are they so certain that that's the case? And they'll say a number of different things. For example, at University of Manitoba, I had a very, very nice Aboriginal man who told me it's because the knowledge keepers say it's the case. And the knowledge keepers never lie. That was his position. And so you'd ask questions like, well, what happens if 2 knowledge keepers disagree? One says that there are remains there, and another one says that there are none. And that kind of leads people to think a little bit about that. And if you were to hear a knowledge keeper say that they didn't believe that there are remains there, would that make you less certain about your position? So this is an excellent method because it's not about you're right or you're wrong. It's about how certain are you about this claim, and what evidence do you have to support it. And so it doesn't get into the same kind of confrontational kinds of kind of reactions that can happen with other methods. Unfortunately, however, the people at universities are now so deranged that they cannot allow that to happen. And so at the latest kind of episodes, my mats have been stolen twice. You cannot get people to participate. They just accost you. So what I've been doing is showing up with the billboards. So I had billboards with what remains is one of the questions on the front, and then denial or truth, which has Dallas Brody with the sign 0 bodies that's in front of the sign saying the 215, every child matters. and you just go in with the billboards and then have these questions that you ask, and then you can sort of do a similar kind of thing as the street epistemology. You just don't have the mats on the ground that get defaced and stolen and sort of thing. But what's been happening now is that these mobs are so aggressive that eventually the police will drag you out of there because they don't want to do anything about the people they should be doing something about, which is the intolerant group that cannot even have a question asked that they dislike. They find it easier to leave the mob intact and take out the people who are asking the questions. So that is a serious, serious problem in universities. It happened at the University of Lethbridge on February 4th, where I was dragged out of there by the police because Tony Hall, who's a professor emeritus there, and I were going to stay there until the crowd calmed down, and then we would have the event. But that's the method that I use. It's called the super nanny method. I'm not sure if you've seen Joe Frost use super nanny. What she does is that she just has a lot of patience, and she's dealing with toddlers who are very badly behaved, and she just keeps on taking them back onto the naughty spot until they get tired, and then eventually you can interact with them in a rational way. And that's how I was dealing with the students. And it did work in some cases at Thompson Rivers University and University of Winnipeg, but because the police, Tony and I were going to stay there all night. That's what we decided. We're just going to hang in here. We'll stay here all night, and eventually these toddlers are going to get tired, and then we'll be able to talk to them. But of course, the police are not going to put up with that, and they dragged me out after, I think it was 6 hours. We stood with these deranged students for 6 hours, and what they did is they left Tony. When they dragged me out, they left him by himself. So he was surrounded by this angry mob who then threw him to the ground outside, and all sorts of other horrible things happened. So that's the situation that happened at the University of Lethbridge. That was totally unacceptable, what occurred that day. The government must intervene at the University of Lethbridge. And they sent me a letter saying I should contact the University of Lethbridge and try to work through our differences. It's like, that's not going to do it here. This really is not going to do it. So that's kind of where we're at right now. And I think, just bringing up, this is a very serious problem because, as George Orwell said in his novel 1984, freedom is the freedom to be able to state that 2 + 2 make 4. Once that is granted, all else follows. And what Orwell is trying to get at is the stating of facts is fundamental in a democratic society. And with this Kamloops case, we cannot state facts. Like there's no evidence that the remains of 215 children have been found at the former Kamloops Indian Residential School. And it is highly improbable that that would be the case because not one parent has said that their child went missing from that school. And if that is the case, who are the 215 children who would be buried clandestinely in that apple orchard? And besides, we had an RCMP investigation in the 1990s. No one ever mentioned unmarked graves at the Kamloops Indian Residential School at that time. As well, these knowledge keepers who supposedly said that children were woken up in the middle of the night to dig the graves. Not one of these knowledge keepers has actually said this publicly, and no one even made any of these claims before Sarah Bollier, the GPR operator, ran her GPR machine across that apple orchard and came up with these 215 hits, which now, now people say there's 215 bodies that are buried there. So it just is, it's a completely implausible scenario, and the fact that we cannot have truth about Kamloops does not bode well for the future. And so what I'm going to continue to do is in British Columbia, which is sort of ground zero for this terrible situation with the universities, We're going into the legislature, the BC legislature, on the 5th anniversary. The 5th anniversary of the false claim that was made, May 27th, 2021, on May 27th, 2026. 5 years later, we're going to go and have an event on the lawn of the British Columbia Legislature with Dallas Brody, Jim McMurtry, and myself. And we are going to demand that those $12.1 million that were supposed to go to the excavations must be done, because we must have truth about the Kamloops case. If we can't have truth about Kamloops, we can't have truth about anything. And we must fight now and fight hard to prevent the looming totalitarianism that happens when you cannot state facts in a democratic society. Thank you very much.
Fact check true. Just to be clear on that one. Part of bearing witness is also taking the courage and doing something about it, making some sort of change, the road less traveled, staying on the high road. No matter how difficult it is, do it. I do want to recognize a few more people here that's not on stage as a speaker, but they're here in their presence. So I want to kind of acknowledge a few people here. Ron Robertson, interim leader of the Independence Party of Alberta. You mind taking a stand? Grant Abraham, leader of the United Party of Canada. Bathsheba Vandenberg, a human rights lawyer, heading to the Supreme Court of Canada to continue to fight for us. Chris Carbert, who went down to the border to stand up for our future, and he took 3-4 years of incarceration. Chris? And also Dr. Roger Hodgkinson, who stood up for us when no one else would. I'm going to put him to work a little bit later. He's going to be part of the Q&A after the documentary that I made that I'll be sharing with all of you after the Q&A session here. Stick around for that, because quite frankly, without people like him and the other 4 I just mentioned, we'd be way, way, way worse off. It's the tough roads that these gentlemen and wonderful woman who's taking us down to ensure that we at least have the pressure on the status quo and we make some more change. Our next speaker, I met her through X, and I'm like, oh, who's this? She's saying all the right things. It's pretty cool. Like, yes, absolutely, let's fight. And then I had her on the show, and now she put into me a phrase that I use all the time, left-UG. This is somebody who was on the left, but they had enough rational intelligence, curiosity, and did some of the homework to understand that something weird is really going on. This isn't what they adopt anymore. So they leave and they become a refugee. So a left-UG. And since then, I have met so many. And I'm like, you know what you are? You're a left-UG. Like, huh, I guess so. Political orphans is another term that gets used as well. So Melanie, if you don't mind, you can share with everybody why you're a left-UG.
He stole my joke. Okay, so I have a lot of facts, a lot of important information, so I'm going to do something I don't normally do, which is read. So I hope you don't mind too much. So good afternoon. I'm Melanie Bennet. Thank you all for being here, and thank you, Jason and Paula, for inviting me. Like so many of you in this room tonight, I'm a parent, and I used to consider myself on the political left, but that changed after moving to Ontario several years ago. Now, I defected the moment that I saw what that label had become to mean in practice. And today, I'm what Jason has mentioned. I call myself a left-UG. I'm basically politically homeless. I was once a climate change researcher, and following a series of life events, I gave up a career I'd spent more than 15 years building. a career I left the UK to pursue. And I'm not a researcher anymore, at least not that kind. I'm an investigative journalist exposing the myriad of ideological excesses that have taken over the K-12 education system, mostly in Ontario. I do this work as a parent rather than because of my politics, because I believe that students go to school to learn skills. Most parents also believe that to be true, but increasingly that has become a minor part of how education works. The education system has truly lost its way. Schooling should be a shared project to pass on civilizational knowledge, but today it looks more like a training ground for far-left political ideologies that divide students. It undermines families and jeopardizes the physical safety of both students and teachers alike. And today they pit students against one another along lines of race, gender, sexuality, geopolitical, and historical grievances. Now, none of this happened in a vacuum. It's the direct result of our collective failure to notice that schools were reorientating themselves farther and farther away from academic excellence. Now, let me explain what I mean. Not even a year ago, I became Juno News's investigative journalist, and my beat was looking mostly at trans and diversity, equity, and inclusion policies in Ontario schools. And what I found shocked me. The Hamilton Wentworth District School Board has a Positive Space Club guide for teachers and educators. It's essentially a training manual that's circulated to teachers wishing to open up a gender sexuality club rebrand, a positive space club. And effectively, it acted as a teacher's guide to, quote, queering childhood. We know this happens, of course, but what was most curious in this particular training manual is that it included detailed instructions on how to become an LGBT or how to use LGBT and queer political narratives to train students to become intersectional social justice activists. So what happens in Positive Space Club truly stays in Positive Space Club. And Hamilton is certainly not unique in this regard. Leaked classroom materials from a grade 7 class in Waterloo showed one English teacher who used her class time over several weeks to deliver woke-aligned intersectional social justice topics on anti-Black racism, trans rights, and intersectionality. And that teacher told students that parental rights is nothing but a myth, and that parents truly have no right to know when their child is being socially transitioned at school. Okay. We hear these stories all the time, and it could just be the odd rogue teacher. So I decided to put that question to the test. I wrote to 30 schools in Ontario in 7 school boards. I posed as a concerned parent, and by email, I asked each one of these schools, or I told them that I was worried that my child had been told to keep secrets when they attended the GSA or Rainbow Club at that particular school. The child was being told to keep secrets, I told them. I asked, if a child asks you to keep secrets from their parents, what's your policy? And I expected them to deny that they keep secrets or at least provide links to some policies without giving me much information. But that is not what happened. The vast majority of schools responded within 1 day, and nearly all of them admitted that they had a, quote, confidentiality policy, but denied that students were being asked to keep secrets. Not one of those schools provided me, the concerned parent reaching out to them, with a link to those policies. Now, I know those policies exist because I've read them all. My biggest project since I started at Juno News has been to collect freedom of information disclosure on diversity, equity, and inclusion training for teachers. And that process has been long and expensive, and I'm very, very grateful for Juno News for supporting my hunches. Now, hundreds of professional development documents and consultant invoices later, a very clear pattern is emerging. Equity training in many boards is essentially naked racism, sexism, homophobia, and centers distinctly political narratives where academics are relegated to second fiddle in the rank hierarchy. Certain groups, real or imagined, and we know them, white, male, Christian, Zionists specifically, are positioned as perpetual oppressors. In some circles, defending them is akin to defending the famous Austrian painter. And racial segregation has made a big comeback. For example, many of you may or may not have heard of things called affinity clubs, which is a fancy word for racially segregated space. These are now casually baked into daily school life. And the financial cost to taxpayers is eye-watering. Between 2017 and 2025, the Ontario School Board spent millions on race and identity consultants, something which I haven't published yet, through my FOI disclosures. The Ministry of Education in Ontario spent at least $500 million on Indigenous, anti-racism, and other DEI-related initiatives, a spend rate that has grown almost exponentially year on year since in my analysis. And this is actually a conservative estimate. The $500 million was based on collating publicly available reports, and the real figure is likely to be much higher. I want to make it clear that I'm not here to defend any group as inherently privileged or indeed villainous. The collective ideology is the problem. It demands a scapegoat. Again, I'll repeat: white, Jewish, cis, male, heterosexual, even colonizer. And it creates a friend-enemy distinction that stops critical thought dead in its tracks. And the thing about these ideologies is it tells you what to think about complicated topics. Now, step outside the boundaries of that ideology and you too will be outcast, as we've just heard. Much better to conspicuously signal your allegiance and maintain your social currency. Don't flinch. I'm going to use a word that many of you may have come to reject with your own thought-stopping reasons, but bear with me on this one. Western liberalism built Canada precisely on rejecting that very trap. Now, I know the big L, liberals, ruined this term, but remember, it's not a political party. It's a way of organizing society that has resulted in the greatest social and economic flourishing the world has ever seen, and in record time. It treats people as individuals, not as avatars of their self-selected identity. And if we turn our backs on this fundamental principle and decide that every group must don their fighting gloves and duke it out in the oppression Olympics, we risk losing the thing that has made us Canada. Or perhaps here it made you Alberta, and by extension, the West in general. Now, Alberta, you have a chance in the upcoming weeks and months to build something better. Don't fall into the same scapegoating trap. So how did we get here? It absolutely did not happen overnight. And for decades, cultural socialism and progressive racial politics, most notably critical race theory, wormed their way from America right here into the Canadian education system. But critical race theory isn't in schools. I hear you cry. And that's because something else aside from CRT is the culprit. If CRT, critical race theory, is the poison, then culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy is the hypodermic needle injecting CRT into all aspects of education, from lesson plans to after-school clubs to even selecting books for kindergarten story time. And it's even behind Hamilton School Board's, quote, anti-colonial graduation ceremonies. So it's not really taught. It's infused in the very air that every student breathes. Now, mind you, the Ministry of Education requires that all school boards and their schools use culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy at the foundational level of education itself. And while you think that your child is learning to read, they're being taught to effectively read the world politically. So again, I'll repeat: male, cis, heterosexual, white, Jewish, Zionist, and students labeled as conservative are cast as guilty of whiteness, of being a settler colonizer before they've even opened a textbook. You don't need to be any of these things. You just need to be perceived as these things. And kids either become believers themselves, and we've all seen it, or they learn to parrot back the expected beliefs to keep their teachers happy. So maybe it doesn't matter. I've asked myself this too. If we have a bunch of ideology in the classroom, who cares? Does it work? Now, you don't need to be a fancy analyst either. So let's just run through some questions. So ask yourself, have the grades improved? Do the kids feel more or less safe in the classroom? Are they happier? And are the rates of violence increasing or decreasing? And I think all of us in this room here, we can intuit the answers to these questions. So the ideological capture has absolutely not stopped at the school gate. It's gone from, it's even gone after parental freedom of expression inside the very forums designed to hold schools to account, and that is parent governance. Perhaps you participate in parent governance yourselves. Across Ontario, a few parents have raised objections to mandatory land acknowledgements at their school council. And these statements, we know, are treated as sacred, quasi-religious declarations of virtuous fealty, and they're ruled utterly out of bounds to even discuss. The first rule of land acknowledgement is that you never talk about land acknowledgements, it seems. One parent, Jeff Horseman, has launched a JCCF legal challenge against the Waterloo Board because he was arguing that forcing parents to participate in the recitation of these land acknowledgements, while also at the same time refusing so much as a discussion on the topic, amounts to an unholy marriage of censorship and compelled speech all at the same time. So school councils, they exist under the Ontario Education Act, but also I imagine the Alberta Education Act, to let parents have a voice in school culture and school policy. And when boards treat any kind of discussion even on land acknowledgements as beyond the pale, the message really is quite clear. Say the words, or we have ways of making you disappear. Now, I want to shift our attention onto something that concerns me even more than some of these, I guess, woke topics, and that is Islamism. So while I have documented trans policies, racial hierarchies, and the DEI grift in a lot of the work that I do, the infiltration of Islamist networks within the K-12 education system is actually advancing faster, deeper, and with much, much less public scrutiny. So I will be more specific. So I'm talking about groups aligned with an organization or a movement called the Muslim Brotherhood. And to be clear, the Muslim Brotherhood does not mean all Muslims. So let's put that to one side. So the Brotherhood is a religious fundamentalist political project which has a long-term strategy to establish a global Islamic caliphate. And it operates openly in some places via front organizations, and in other areas it denies its existence altogether if the environment is less favorable. So in a way, think of the Muslim Brotherhood sort of like the Antifa movement for religious movements. So Hamas's own charter identifies the group as the Palestinian branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. And just to give you a flavor of its worst elements, in multiple countries, Egypt, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Austria, and now the United States have designated the Brotherhood or some of its branches as terrorist organizations. So in Canada, we've done the complete opposite. We've welcomed that influence. And that's not to say that all Brotherhood-aligned groups in Canada are engaging in violent jihad. That is certainly not the argument that I'm making here today. The Brotherhood flavor we see here in the West is more akin to something that a colleague of mine has called white-collar extremism. So it's really from professional fundamentalists engaging in institutional entryism to quickly change a system to make it more favorable to itself. And the International Council for Middle East Studies and Global Affairs report on the Muslim Brotherhood entryism tactics has documented how the Brotherhood views education, very specifically K-12 education, as the primary vehicle for long-term social transformation. And I recognize that pattern in my own work. Basically create private Islamic schools to shape identity, which we have, then extend that influence into public schools by training teachers and shaping the curriculum while you're at it, all while getting sympathetic administrators and bureaucrats on board. And in Ontario, the Muslim Association of Canada, or MAC, has quite happily to sing the praises of the Muslim Brotherhood's founder, Hassan al-Banna, on their FAQ page. You can go see for yourselves. But they do deny any formal affiliations with any Brotherhood group. So the CRA they have a counterterrorism unit called the Review and Analysis Division, and they published an audit detailing multiple allegations of MAC's leadership's involvement with the Egyptian and other Muslim Brotherhood organizations. Some of that does remain under court order, but you can apply for it and read it for yourselves, and one of them is public. So while the Muslim Association of Canada runs numerous private schools, the National Council of Canadian Muslims, or NCCM, focuses their attention on direct institutional influence, while the NCCM's American counterparts, CARE USA, were named as unindicted co-conspirators in the Holy Land Foundation trial, which is America's largest terrorist trial. They deny any allegations or alignment with the Brotherhood or other terrorist organizations. But together, MAC and the NCCM, among other closely affiliated groups, have embedded Islamophobia into education using the language similar to the DI language that I was just speaking of earlier, but as well human rights, intersectional, anti-racism, training for staff and students, among a whole bunch of other things. And they do all this with very, very generous government funding. But what does political Islam really look like in practice? Well, first of all, it isn't about strapping bombs to themselves, so we can forget that idea. It's about narrative building. So narratives that are designed to appeal to progressives, to unions, to compassionate educators, and also woke boards of education and administrators. It fluently speaks the language of intersectional social justice, placing Islam, by extension, Muslims, in the role of peak victim. And let's discuss an Albertan example. At Calgary's Fairview School this March, the cafeteria turned into no food spaces during Ramadan to accommodate fasting students. Now, parents were told, boilerplate communication teams messaging, that there had been no changing to the eating areas, except that wasn't true. Now, remember, I'm a journalist, an investigative journalist, and so I found some of those parents and I spoke to them. And essentially what they told me is that they confirmed that absolutely, yes, the grade 9s had been asked no longer to eat in the in designated areas. So there had been changes. Not only that, I spoke to an internal staff member who didn't want to be identified, who absolutely confirmed that this was going on. And so that shouldn't really surprise anyone who has bothered to read the Calgary Board of Education's DEI report. I think it's called CBE Cares. In it, the board describes itself as, quote, a white, male, conservative, and Christian organization that must be dismantled. Christian, and I'm sure in this room will be sympathetic to this, is quite specifically generally cast as a source of systemic education throughout the education system. It doesn't matter what province you're in. So Islam, therefore, must be protected as a sacred identity. And this is reinforced in Islamophobia strategies, such as the one recently launched in Manitoba. It deliberately conflates criticism of religious ideas with racism against individuals. And this is a theme that comes up again and again. And you should ask yourself at this stage, why is a religion being given essentially an NDP equity card, to give special privileges? So Islamophobia definitions in this country were essentially created by groups like NCCM and their acolytes. And it does treat Islam as both a race and a protected belief system. And it completely shields its practices that clash with Western civilizations from scrutiny. So as a free speech union in the UK says, it's a blasphemy code by the back door. And we are seeing that increasingly. And since 2018, the NCCM alone has received over $2 million from federal grants, but even provincially, it receives money. So the NCCM received over $750,000 from the Ontario Ministry of Education. I don't think that's the case in Alberta. Don't worry about Alberta, but it's certainly not the case, I think, in other provinces. So this is something that is coming out of Ontario. And I'm trying to find out why. I've got a lot of FOIs to try to find out where this money specifically is going. And I've been arguing to get this information with our privacy commissioner for some time. So I'll find out eventually and I'll let you all know. So they have been delivering this programming for at least 30 TDSBs, so Toronto District School Board schools, and giving this training to also over 5,000 of their students. But they refuse to disclose any of this stuff to me. So specifically the NCCM give me a really hard time when it comes to FOI disclosure. So we are in effect the useful idiots. So while we pour millions into consultants and anti-hate programs at a once secular education system, it's being transformed into something that demonizes other faiths and brands its critics as bigots. Now, friends, We are living in a singularly unique moment in history. Ordinary citizens have never had more power to shape their own future. And I know it doesn't feel like that sometimes. But don't tell anyone that any of this is useless. Don't even bother. Don't listen to that. Some of that, if you ask me, is simply an artifact of decades of comfort, because we have been very comfortable. And the trouble is that character is not built in that comfort. It's forged in hard choices to stand up when it would be much, much easier to stay silent. So one of my favorite British comedians, an all-round boss, Jimmy Carr, said it very bluntly. He said, "You can't have an easy life and have a good character." So here's my challenge to every one of you today. What one hard thing can you do today that will forge a stronger, prouder version of yourself and build a better country for your children? So those of you who perhaps can't stand in the arena, specifically yourselves, what might you consider do to support those who are doing the standing up? So the path is not going to be easy if you choose to do this. We've heard this theme over and over today that, okay, we might stand up, but it's, it comes at a cost, pay the price. And for me, I did give up a lucrative consulting career. I faced years of worries that I wasn't going to be able to buy food or afford the roof over my head. And for years before publishing my first article, I would work a day job and then do my second job in the evening, doing a whole bunch of research and communicating that to the public on a YouTube channel. And I did all that for no pay for a number of years. For you, things may not be so dramatic. I do like to take risks, and that's my own fault. But just remember that whatever's worth doing is probably going to involve some kind of sacrifice. But if you persist and you do it with integrity and, most importantly, grit, the future you will be quite grateful. That I can assure you. So thank you.
She came from Ontario to be with us here today. Thank you very much. So how many of you enjoyed your lunch from Whistle Stop? How many of you know they locked up Chris Scott? He wanted to just feed. So during the lockdown, they said, no, you can't feed. Like, what are you talking about? It's food. We all need that. They fined him, locked him up, took away his shop a bit. He had to fight in order to get it all back. Is Chris around? He should be around somewhere. Somebody find him. Did they get him already? Oh, there he is. But he's one of my best friends now, somebody I spent a lot of time with talking. He was very quick to say yes to come and do this. And as you may know, he's doing like 200 independence conversations all over Alberta. Chris, if you don't mind, come join us. Got you looking.
Where do I stand? Well, thank you very much. That was awesome. And thank you for buying food from me. I really appreciate it. If there's one thing that you can never accuse me of being, it is anti-capitalism. I'm an entrepreneur and a capitalist, and it actually means a lot to me, the support that I have in those endeavors. So thank you very much. So, as it says on the screen behind me, my name is Christopher Scott, and I'm the owner of the Whistle Stop Cafe in Mirror, Alberta. How many of you have been to the Whistle Stop Cafe in Mirror, Alberta? Awesome. Right on. Well, for the rest of you, you have something to aspire to. My journey that led me here is completely uninteresting. It doesn't involve police or rallies or... Wait a minute. Hold on a second. My journey that got me here is actually pretty interesting. It involves police, arrests, seizure of my business and my building. I don't even know how many times I've been to court. It involves politicians talking to me and some running away from me, which was really interesting. But the biggest thing was experiencing that those things from the perspective of someone who didn't understand what was going on. I was witnessing things going on around me without even realizing how they could happen or why they could happen. And I think a lot of people are in that same position, right? Like I was 40 years old before I ever bothered to really read the Constitution, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I was 42 years old before I bothered to try and understand how politics works, how civics works, any of those things. I remained ignorant in these things most of my adult life. And looking back now, I actually feel a little bit ashamed because I spent all that time complaining about the things that I was witness to, the things that were going on around me, and I hadn't bothered to find out why they were happening or what I could do. And it actually wasn't until I was sleeping on a concrete slab in the drunk tank of all places, even though I was 100% sober. And I was in there for the crime of protesting government policy on my own property that I owned, lock, stock, and barrel, peacefully. I was in jail. And when you're in that type of a situation, your perspective shifts a little bit. Some of the things that you believed to be true before, all of a sudden you question. You know that age-old phrase that we all have heard on the schoolyard, well, it's a free country, isn't it? Do you remember that? Someone would ask if they could play something, or say, well, it's a free country, isn't it? We start to wonder about that. I start to wonder about, yeah, I love that. I start to wonder about the look on my grade 4 teacher's face. His name was Mr. Ruda. He was a great teacher. We gave him a heart attack because we were really crazy kids. I think he survived. The look on his face talking about Canada, what it meant to be Canadian, talking about the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Constitution. And I'll remind you, this was fairly fresh. It had just been repatriated in 1982. And when I was in Mr. Ruda's class, I guess it would have been 1986, 1987, maybe something like that. I can't quite remember. But it was fresh, right? Within a half a decade anyway. He was so excited and so proud to talk about these things. He was so happy to be able to tell his class that they lived in the most free and prosperous country ever, and everybody wanted to be here. And it was great because the government gave us some rights. And they gave us this document, and it made sure that we'd be free forever. And I believed that. I believed that we had attained some measure or some sort of freedom and that it would just always be there. Then I'm lying in a jail cell for the crime of protesting that Mr. Ruda told me it was a right of mine. I had the right to protest as a Canadian. And so I started seeing it a little bit differently. Well, that forced me to dig into what it means to be Canadian, what it means to be an Albertan, who I am, what my place is here. And I came to some very startling conclusions, the biggest of which was that nothing was what I thought. You know, Canada wasn't what I believed it was. And not only that, as an Albertan, I started to realize that some of the things that make Canada Canada were specifically keeping not just Alberta, but the West back. They were holding us back. And so I'm digging into these things, trying to fight for my survival, trying to win against the government in the government's court, by the way. And that doesn't go so well. Many people in this room know that. And I started realizing that it wasn't enough just to know what was going on and watch what was happening. It wasn't enough to bear witness to the injustices going on around me and talk about them. If you see those things and you don't do anything about it, what's the point? Bearing witness, to me, that implies that you're shouldering a burden. You're holding that. You're carrying that with you. And when you carry something heavy like that, it should motivate you to act and to change things. One of the first things that I was witness to that really affected my life, that changed me. It actually changed me. It took me off a path of political apathy, civil ignorance, that kind of thing. I heard somebody tell me about the passing of their mother. And during that time, nobody was allowed to be with their loved ones as they passed. So our compassionate, benevolent government allowed them to have an iPad to say goodbye to their mother. Now, I've told this story before, and I'll tell it, I will keep telling this story, because this was like a knife to my heart. Could you imagine? Some of you in this room have gone through this, but could you imagine your mother's final breath? You can't put your arms around her. You can't hold her hand. You're watching it digitally in the digital age, because the government took something from you that could never, ever be replaced. That was my motivation for continuing. This was kind of mid-2021, I guess. The Whistle Stop Cafe had become infamous. I made national news. Things were really shook up. Things were happening. Changes were being made. Kenny was running with his tail between his legs. And I could have stopped then and gone back to my life and just did my thing. But after I was witness to that and many other things like it, I could no longer be that person. I had to do something different. And I haven't always done the best job I can. I'm not perfect. But I'm telling you this to point out that as we see these things going on around us, it's important that it motivates us to do something about it. We've all heard the phrase, be the change you want to see in the world. That's a real thing. It really is. And none of those things that happened to me would have mattered at all in my life had I chosen to just forget about it and go on my merry way. So anyway, I entered a phase of my life of, I guess you would say, advocacy. Advocating for myself, first and foremost, because I was affected, and then that's what got me into this fight. And then as the stories came in, as people approached me and shared their stories with me, now my motivation wasn't so much about myself. As a matter of fact, I thought to myself many times, after listening to what these people have gone through, it doesn't matter what happens to me because somebody has to do something about it. And then it became advocating for the future, advocating for a change, advocating for a solution to the problems that we've faced. That brought me full circle back to our Constitution, back to what it means to be Canadian, back to the Charter rights and freedoms, back to the very foundation of what Canada is. And interestingly enough, as an Albertan, subject to the, what I would say, inequities that we face within Confederation, I came to the inevitable conclusion that Alberta needs to stand up. Not just me, not just us collectively, but Alberta needs to stand up. And why Alberta? Why? Why a dusty prairie province? Not really, Alberta's beautiful, but in the middle of Canada, why is it us? Well, we have the tenacity, we have the resources, we have the willpower, we have the experience, we have the motivation that comes from a place in our hearts where we're sympathetic to what other people are going through. We have all those things. We have the opportunity granted to us by this country. If Confederation is unfair to the West, it is fair in one regards, and that is that it is supposed to respect the will of the people, even to the point if a group of people, their will is to no longer be governed under that Confederation. That is a huge opportunity. And I want to remind everybody here and everybody watching that opportunity that we have as Albertans, that we have as Canadians, to do something that's never been done before, to take control of our futures, to be sovereign. That's not always free. This year is the 250th anniversary of the greatest experiment in freedom in world history, and that is the United States. 250 years ago, after a multi-year, 6-year, I guess, bloody war where thousands of people died, they were granted, or they took the opportunity to self-govern, to do things themselves. And now Alberta, We have the opportunity to do that with the stroke of a pen. There's countries in this world who have spent hundreds of years fighting, lost entire families, hundreds of years for the opportunity to master to chart their own course forward. And now you folks, you get that in October, very likely. So this opportunity that we have, this opportunity that Alberta has to make the will of the people known to government and known to the world, is nothing to take lightly. There are some people in this room that don't agree with me that Alberta needs to stand up and be sovereign and chart their own course forward. I understand that. There are people in this room that agree with me. I can tell because you're wearing my merchandise. Thank you very much. But regardless of what side of this conversation you're on, you need to, I suggest that you consider all of the things you have witnessed in your lifetime as a Canadian and as an Albertan. And you let those things influence your actions in the future. What are you going to do about it? Some people, like my friend Jason Kenney, he thinks that Alberta should just continue incremental steps. Just continue begging for crumbs, asking Confederation to allow us to chart our own course. He believes that. I watched him debate Bruce Party on that. And I wish I had debated him because I would have done better. I disagree. I don't want incremental change. I don't want crumbs. What I've seen happen in the direction I've watched this country go in my lifetime suggests to me that we do not have time for incremental change. When the government lays the foundation through Bill C9, I guess, or C8, whichever one, when they lay the foundation to fine, jail, or otherwise punish you for your thoughts and expression, you have a serious problem. When the government tells you you may not defend yourself, you have a serious problem. When the government starts encouraging you to sacrifice children to protect adults, whether it's injecting them with things during the pandemic, or whether it's sacrificing their futures financially so that you can maintain some ridiculous pension plan that's the worst investment you'll ever make, and you're compelled by law to contribute to it. You know, we watch people putting their elbows up and elbowing kids right in the head, taking their futures away so that they can be comfortable, so that they can protect what they've built. That's backwards. This country is backwards. And this isn't Alberta. This isn't what our values are. We sacrifice for our kids. We do things for our kids. And as I watch Canada drift further and further from the values of what the majority of Western Canada have in their hearts, and how quickly it's happening, we don't have time for incremental change. I wish we did, because I was always that guy. I was always that guy when my friend Dr. Dennis Modry would ask, how many people in this room want a referendum in Alberta so that we can have leverage and negotiate a better position within Confederation and stay? I would be like, yes, I want that because I love this country. I want to fix everything. Well, since then, I watched the carnage, no pun intended, of the liberal regime continue, even after it was, even after most of Canada agreed that we couldn't keep going down that path. I watched it flip out of fear of another country's president. And we elected somebody who wrote a book called Values, in which he describes capitalism and energy as like two of the worst things in the world, where he describes how people are going to have their rights and freedoms limited for the greater good. And I ask myself, do I really want to try and negotiate anything different with a government that has a majority now, and we all knew that was going to happen, didn't we? With a prime minister who muses about preventing provinces from using the notwithstanding clause when they don't agree with what the federal government is doing. Do we really want to try and fix things or negotiate with a government that's that far gone from what we believe in? What kind of a risk would that be? Could you imagine if I got my way and we entered negotiations with the federal government? They said, fine, all the provinces agree, or 7 out of 10 provinces agree, we're going to open the Constitution. The House of Commons agrees, the Senate agrees, the Supreme Court agrees. We're going to open and amend the Constitution. Do you really want Mark Carney's fingers that penned that book value anywhere near that document? I don't either. That put me on another path. And it got me thinking more about what this country is. When I was a child, I believed that we got together in a room like this hundreds of years ago, 160 years ago, something like that, 159 years ago. And we decided how we're going to govern. We decided how our government would look and what laws we're going to live under. And we agreed, and then we formed a country. Well, that didn't happen, folks. That's never happened in Canada. Our documents, our supreme law was not something that we decided on. We did not consent to being governed in that way. The Western provinces sure didn't consent to being governed in the way we are. You ask anybody right now, except for the most stringent liberals, if they would agree to the terms that Alberta would have within Confederation if we were independent already and asked to join. Nobody in their right mind would, right? We wouldn't. That wasn't done by us. That was done by somebody else and imposed on us. You have this idea that Canada is a sovereign independent nation for the people. It isn't. It was a system of governance imposed on us by the British Crown and some elite in Canada at the time who were rewarded handsomely for imposing that on us. And now Alberta has an opportunity to do something different. And all we have to do is sacrifice a little bit of our time, none of our blood, hopefully not our lives. I mean, people threaten me all the time, but usually the people that say things don't do anything, thank God. We have an opportunity to actually be the first people in Canada that decide how we're going to be governed. That is what freedom is. Freedom is when the people decide how they're going to be governed. When the people decide, if the government is against what somebody wants to do, the people are going to have somebody to advocate for them. We don't have that right now. I can tell you that because it costs almost $350,000 for me to defend myself against what the government was doing when I was right. This is the opportunity we have. We have an opportunity to look back across history at all of the different countries that had semblance of freedom. We have an opportunity to pick the best parts of all of that and set the stage so that Alberta can be the most free and most prosperous, beautiful country the world has ever seen. And in doing so, we become a beacon of hope to every other Canadian who feels the same way. Every Canadian that no longer wants incremental change. Every Canadian who realizes it's time that we did it ourselves, by the people, for the people, starting in Alberta. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a man that can start a fire, whether it's a grill or in our hearts, right? Look at him go. What a man. Speaking of men, we got one more for you. So if you're going to become a journalist and get out there and be an influencer and do all that kind of stuff, one of the things that you better check is your ego. You have to have some humility. So the first time I think I met him in person was at the Big Four event in Calgary. Anybody here went to that? And I'm standing there shaking his hand, meeting him for the first time. And this lady comes up. She goes, "Hey, how are you doing?" Says to me, I'm like, "Hey, how are you doing?" "I'm good." "Can you take my picture with him?" I'm like, "Yeah, I could do that." So I became the cameraman for him. But he's a great guy. Now, how many people in here are under 30? We said truth and facts, sir. Let's be honest here. That's because they don't come to these type of events, but it doesn't mean they're not listening and paying attention. They're online, TikTok, Instagram, and they also do things in very short bursts. This would kill most of them, an event like this. And somebody who's really good at that is Lawrence. They might be going, well, who's Lawrence? That's because that's Bert a proud dad. Lawrence, without further ado.
All right. How's everybody doing? All right. I was told 20 minutes for a guy who makes videos that are 90 seconds long. That is hard. That is very hard. But like, look at this lineup, right? You got journalists, you got professors, you got politicians, and then you got a heavy-duty mechanic. And that's me. And we're talking about bearing witness. And do I got to stand somewhere? Like I'm a talker and I move around, so. Talk about bearing witness. This is going to be a little bit of a depressing story, but I promise near the end, it'll get a little bit better. But if the hope is that we all start talking and we all start being vocal, we have to know what that takes. Because I just fell into this by accident and I had no clue. So I actually used to make videos when I was 7 years old. My parents got a VHS camcorder. You guys know what those are. You plug the tape in. And I remember when President Bill Clinton did the little thing with Monica Lewinsky. I did a news story on it. And yeah, this little kid sitting at a table, and you know, I should dig that up actually. And I should put that out there. And I pull the tape out, put it in, and you know, after dinner every night, my parents would watch my news stories. That's what they did. Yeah. So fast forward to today, I would have never thought that making videos on the internet would put me on a stage with some pretty impressive people. But influence and being an influencer, that's a hard one. It was said to me today, I don't like calling myself an influencer. But you are. And it comes with huge responsibility. Huge responsibility. You know, we mentioned the 30-year-olds. I can tell you my demographics. I look at them all the time. I have men and women between 18 and 80. That's everybody. That's huge responsibility. And yes, if you've watched my videos, I rant. I go off. I might look angry because I am. I am upset. And I'm not trying to get people angry to do something stupid. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get people engaged. As a society, we become so indoctrinated and so brainwashed by these institutions that so many people out there think, well, we can't do anything. There's nothing we can do, right? I lived in active addiction for 20 years of my life. 8 of those years was cocaine. It just so happens that after Justin Trudeau got elected, my life absolutely nosedived, and I felt like I couldn't do anything else. And that's hard for me to talk about. My wife is sitting back there. And without her, I wouldn't even be alive today. That woman has been through so much with me. She's watched me hit rock bottom. And when nobody else was there to help me back up, and she could have left, she stayed. And I think about that every day. We're going to be grandparents. My daughter's expecting in July. My grandson is never going to see his grandfather drunk, stoned. He's only going to see his grandfather fighting for his future. But making these videos online doesn't come without sacrifice. I mentioned that I'm a mechanic. I'm a mechanic that nobody will hire because I'm vocal, because I got fired for doing this. We talk about leftist ideology. We talk about on the right. When I look at somebody I disagree with, the last thing I want for them is not to be able to feed their family. I screenshot every threat. Every time somebody wants to cancel me, I screenshot it. Because you never know if you're going to need it in a case, right? A defamation case. We're working on one right now with a guy in Nova Scotia who tried looking up things on my wife, on myself, on my kids. Like, this stuff is real. I don't just make a video, complaining that I get hate. This actually affected my $160,000 a year job, which I was happy to do. I loved my job. So I'm not trying to scare you. I'm not trying to say, don't do this. But I don't want you to do this and think that there are no consequences. But when I look at my kids and I look at my daughter, man, she's like, it's crazy. Like, it is weird. It's when you're looking at your daughter and you're like, whoa, what's going on here? Like, it's not supposed to be right, but she's married and she loves her husband and is right. Yeah, anyway, that's a whole other thing. Did I mention I have ADHD? But I'm doing it for all future generations. And the weird part about it is the people that canceled me, who say all the hateful, nasty things, they're the same people I'm fighting for too. And I want to talk about independence. I know this isn't an independence thing, but we're going to talk about it. I pushed Pierre Poilievre so hard in the last election. Where's the head of the United Party? Is he here still? Anyway, you're not here, but I apologize. Man, I bashed him. Like, I did, because I hate vote splitting, okay? So I was going to come up here and be Mr. Big Man and apologize, so hopefully he sees this. But I respect him for running, for sure. But then I look at the federal party and the federal Conservatives, and then I look at what's happening in Alberta. You can't fix Canada. You can't. Man, that pains me still to say that. Like, it truly does. Because I have not only family throughout this country, like many of you do, I have followers throughout this country. And if you look at the current system and how it's designed, Chris touched on it. Well, Chris stole my speech. So thanks, Chris. The thing is we're ruled by a crown, and people don't understand this. The Charter of Rights and Freedoms might as well be called a Charter of Privileges. They are privileges granted you by the Crown of England that can be taken away from you at any single time. You noticed it during COVID. So what happens in the next big event? Why is Mark Carney right now gone to the Supreme Court with the ruling he lost in an appeal? Why is he doing that? He's going to use it again. That's why. And he can't get egg on his face. He's going to use the Emergencies Act the next chance he can, because he's set precedent. Because COVID was literally an experiment. That's what it was. How many of you will comply? How many of you will listen? And then, okay, look how many are indoctrinated and misinformed, right? Brainwashed. I don't want it. That's not Canada. That's not the Canada I grew up in. That's not the Canada I want my grandkid growing up in. So I will have my grandchild live in the Republic of Alberta and have a future. And it's hard. It's hard for people in the East to understand why we're fighting for that, and I get that. I was invited as an influencer to the Conservative National Convention that was in Calgary. I'll probably never get invited again. That's okay. I didn't get kicked out, so I'll give them props on that. But I spent the entire time talking to members of Parliament and people from all over this country about Alberta independence. They don't have a clue. They know what the Toronto News says to them. They know what they say to them in Halifax, but they don't have a clue. And it's not their fault. It's not. Melissa Nell-Hansman, she came up to me, she gave me a fist pump. Right? The next day, somebody must have said something to her, bad photo op or something. She just walked right by me. Say, hi, Melissa. Nope, not having any of that. No Bird of Proud Dad, that's for sure. But I really had to draw a line in the sand. And it doesn't mean that I'm letting my conservative brothers and sisters in the country down, because I'll fight shoulder to shoulder with them. I still make videos about Mark Carney and the overreach. I'll still continue to do that. I'm now trying to tell every single conservative who has a job and actually can pay taxes to move to Alberta, because, you know, we got immigrants over here that weren't economic migrants. They came and they started using our social programs, and that's what you're seeing in our schools right now. You know, and you know, the left is attacking Danielle Smith on that. Did you know there's 112 languages in our school system today? 112. No wonder why it's a disaster. Teachers can't manage that. And how much money will it take to fix that? That's the thing that people don't understand. So that's why my channel exists. That's why a mechanic who's a drug addict, who got sober, 5.5 years sober, by the way. That's why I decided it's important. But when I came up here and I talk about responsibility, I can come up here and say, hey, you know what, guys? Pick up a microphone, pick up a camera. Anybody can do what I can do. And then I can walk away and not tell you the bad part about it. And that's not fair. So I'm blessed enough, and this is what I love about this movement, this is what I love about conservatism, is when I go out there and I tell my story and I say, I lost my job for this. And then you look at a video and you're like, why does this guy put his shirts in the end of every single video? It's because this is my job now. This is all I can do. Trucking companies won't even hire me. Oil companies won't even hire me. These are the same people that share the same values and beliefs. In fact, I had a job right after I got fired from an oil company up in Fort McMurray. The vice president follows me, actually, fairly big oil company. I was sitting in a first aid course in Calgary. Phone rings. Hey, Lawrence. Hey, how's it going? Can't hire you. Love what you're doing. Love your voice. Keep it up, but stay starving. That's the message I got out of that. So this isn't a pity party. This isn't a poor me party, but I'm just trying to tell everybody, we're not backed by anybody. I don't get government funding. I go around with people like Chris, who stole my speech back there. That's $40, by the way. And we do this. Grifter's got a grift. And we do this because we actually care. We do care. And when I look at a demographic, like I said, 18 to 80, both men and women, that means I'm hitting the young generation, the older generation, the people that are ready to retire. And Leslie tells this story the best, but I'm just going to say it. I almost got ran over by a lady in Costco in her electric scooter, right? She was about 80 years old, because she was rushing up to shake my hand and thank me for everything I'm doing. And I love that. I absolutely love that. But conferences like this one, bearing witness, is what are the costs of telling the truth when you're up against the billion-dollar machine? Billions of dollars, not just $1 billion. You're going to lose your livelihood, and they're going to attack you. Podcast I just came out with, I'm going to plug myself here, it's called Over the Target with Berta Proud Dad, because when you're over the target, they're going to do everything to destroy you. Everything, and you guys all see it. We bear witness to that. Sometimes the truth hurts. I'm a realist. Being a realist is not always easy. Because I don't like vote splitting, I decided to support Pierre in the last election. Right? I'm a supporter of the UCP government. You guys know that. I stand with Danielle Smith. I don't agree with her on everything. There's a couple things, initiatives I'm trying to change right now. One of them being Care First Insurance in Alberta, which is going to strip every single person in this room of their rights to sue if they're in an accident. And we got to stand against that. I'm trying to get that changed right now. Another thing is separation. She believes in a sovereign Alberta within a united Canada. Right? When you believe in faith, family, and freedom, she has the freedom to believe that. She has the freedom to go out there and say that. But I have the freedom to go up against it. And I know there might be people in here that don't want that either. But just months ago, I was in the exact same boat. So just know you got to educate yourself before you make an informed decision on independence. And that's all I'm asking people to do. How much more time do I got left here? Okay, well, now we'll go into the speech. I'm just kidding. I had it all written down here, but like I said, I have ADHD. But this is just wild for me. And I just want to say thank you to everybody who does support me and who does follow me and who does listen to every single person on there, because this is absolutely amazing that a mechanic from Hinton, Alberta, that's where I was raised, is now standing on a stage thank you. My parents would probably be like, what are you doing? My parents are liberals. Did you guys know that? No? Okay. I tried asking them to come. They weren't interested. But maybe next time. But in all reality, I just want to thank Jason, his wife, for putting this all together, because this is extremely important. I want to thank you guys for your patience. Wow, what's going on, Jason? You cut me off. Hello? Okay. Oh, yeah, I want to thank you guys for your patience. I'm not a public speaker. Everything I do is from the heart. Everything I do is off the cuff, and it really comes from passion, because I do love this province, and I do have to. It's my duty to stand up for the future of this province. So thank you.
For the Q&A. Once again for Lawrence. Got the mic. Once again for Lawrence on that one. I didn't know that you're a mechanic, and we got a bus out there. Maybe you take a look at it.
$40.
What do you think's wrong with my bus?
I don't know. Anything? Now's a chance to get an oil change. We have a few more minutes here. We're going to do a quick little, I'm going to moderate a little Q&A with our speakers are left. There's no other speakers here, right? They all stuck away? You're all gone? That's okay. We got the good ones. Oh, wait, this is recorded. Hello? They might see that. So I do have a few questions for you all. We'll start on the end and we'll make our way down on this first one. Why did you get involved? You made lots of sacrifices. You could have continued to do your... Hello? Carney. You could have continued to do research and a bunch of bucks and consulting and all of that, but you sacrificed it all like everybody up on the stage. Why?
You put me in a tough spot.
I've been doing that. I turned him into a public speaker.
Oh, I don't know how to answer this. So one of the promises that I made myself and also my family members was not to talk about my private life. So how do I answer that without answering that? When I came to Canada, I did come to work in lucrative science consulting. But before I understood the issues with education, so I came with my family and obviously put my child in education in Ontario. But even before that, I came across what I now understand to be woke culture in the workplace, which now I think the UK has a lot more of that, but I wasn't particularly experienced in it, or at least the things that were common in the UK, I hadn't really noticed. It really just hit me like a ton of bricks weeks after starting my new job in the Toronto area. So I had a lot of difficulty at this job because in the UK, people like me, I'm funny, but I learned in Canada that you don't just speak your mind, and I wasn't so funny for people. And I made myself a bit of a pariah, and I could never quite understand why that was. And it took me a little while. I noticed it very early on, but it took me a little while to put all the pieces together. And like many refugees that I also know, it takes a long time for these things to, something's wrong, but it takes a really long time for it to really click. And when it does, all the dominoes fall at once. For me, the domino finally falling was during the pandemic, seeing my son's online schooling. And that was, I guess, the thing that made all the dominoes fall. So going back to the question, what made me give it up? Well, I think I was already at a point where I needed a break. I took a break. And when I was faced with the choice of going back, I just didn't want to. And I'm not religious. I don't have a religion. So when I speak about Islam and Christianity and things like that, it's from a place of observation of the patterns that I'm seeing. But it was almost like a religious moment where something's telling me, just take some time, don't go back. And then very quickly after that, I went to a Billboard Chris concert, went to a Billboard Chris protest. Even though I worked in climate change a long time, I never went to a protest. I was never that kind of leftist. I was more of like a nerdy lab one. But I was compelled to go to this particular one on June 9th in Ottawa. It was a pretty big one, pretty important one in this country. I didn't know that. Anyway, so I just go. And I ended up meeting a lot of people that have sort of helped me along the way. And I started, I realized very early on that people didn't want to put their faces forward. They didn't want to speak publicly, but everybody had these same concerns. And I also had this similar concerns. And so I decided to lend my face to the camera. So I would interview people who were anonymous. I would also present information, but that quickly made me unemployable, even if I did want to go back. So that was kind of my journey. It was just something was really off. And it took me a long time to figure it out. And by the time I had figured it out, it was too late because I put my face out in public. So that's why.
Chris, why didn't you just flip burgers?
I'll try and explain it with a story. So I don't remember a lot of my childhood, which is strange. I remember like glimpses. And sometimes when I go in a room and you look at a couch and you can smell the pattern, you know what I'm talking about? The 70s couches. I remember little snippets of things. But I was at my mom's place a few years ago, and she was telling me this story about how I used to end up in the principal's office all the time, and I'd been suspended a few times, and I was in trouble a lot. And I was like, what are you talking about? I was never in trouble. And she's like, yeah, you were always in trouble. And I just couldn't believe that. I said, well, what was I doing? And she said, well, sometimes you were being a little turd, but most of the time, the majority of the time, I was getting in fights. And I was a small kid. I wasn't a bully. I wasn't a big guy. But when I saw the big bullies picking on other kids, I would beat them up. And I don't remember any of this. But my mom does. So I started thinking, I'm like, I think I might actually enjoy this stuff. I'm Irish. But more than that, I think it comes down to when you see certain things and you hear certain things that you can't unsee or unhear, you have a choice to make. Do you act on those things and pursue justice? Or do you do what most people do and ignore it? And there are times in my life where I can ignore things, but I came to a point where I just couldn't. And that story I tell about the person saying goodbye to their mom on the iPad, that was the ultimate bully that I was compelled to go beat up. A government or a bureaucracy that can strip the most precious moments of someone's life from them with no accountability and no justice, you can't watch those things and not do something. So that's, in a nutshell, that's what it is. It's just I feel like at times we have a moral obligation and a duty to stand up for what's right. And oftentimes, as at least one person in this room knows for sure, probably a half a dozen that I can see, in doing so, you make a lot of sacrifices and you get some bruises. But something else happens. You find like-minded people that feel the same as you, and now you come together, right? So it's not nearly as scary to do the right thing when other people are encouraged by your courage and they're around you. And that's what these events are all about. When you guys come out to these events and when people are watching online and we see the interaction, that's encouraging not only to us, but to other people who feel just like us. Maybe they're a burger flipper, maybe they're a professional who have felt and seen these things and they need to do something. That's encouragement for them to do the same thing. So even if you're not, sticking your neck out and taking lumps for the movement, so to speak, when you support and you encourage and you're with the people that is a huge, huge huge benefit, and I'm very grateful for that. So yeah, basically, I'm Irish and I like to fight.
Lawrence, you did a great job on highlighting the bad that comes along with this. It's not all fantastic. Ladies run across the street to get your picture or shake your hand and almost get run over, or use Jason Lavigne to hold a camera for you. It's not always just glamorous. Sometimes they come at your family. Did you expect that? And then what did it feel like when that happened to you the first time?
Yeah, that one's a hard one. For those that don't know, my 16-year-old daughter was doxxed online, which that means they told everybody which school she goes to. They basically said what her name was. We live in a small town, so where we live, there's only one high school there, so you can kind of put it all together. Still I get angry, obviously. Here's the thing about being a public figure, though, that's what they want. They want you to get angry and they want you to go do something stupid, so then you get yourself put into prison, because when you're in prison, you can't make videos, right? Or what they want you to do is go and beat the guy up and then get that on film, so then they can discredit you. That's one of the hardest parts about becoming an influencer, is protecting your family. And then when something does happen, because these people have resources as well, they're spending money on this. This is not just somebody who's a hater and wants to discredit you. There's real money being spent for them to attack you. It's having that sense in you to say, yes, this sucks. Yes, this hurts. But you have responsibility as a public figure and as an influencer. And I will tell all of you in this room, the vice president of that company that the guy works for who did this to my daughter follows me. I did do a video. I did basically say that I wanted to talk to the guy face to face. The president of the company beat me to it. The guy walked into work on Monday and he was fired.
FAFO, right?
That's right.
FAFO.
I don't know what that means.
No?
I'm not going to say it in this building.
Google it. Google it. You can get Stockwell to AI it for you. He'll tell you exactly what it is. Melanie, most of us don't have a journey or a path or an end goal here. Like you did say, you may not have a lot of faith, but I think faith has you. Because if you felt compelled and you thought it was right, you may have had some help there.
Well, that has been a personality trait that has followed me throughout my life. Now, the reason I worked in climate change is because I had it's the same sort of compulsion that led me in that direction. I wanted to do something that mattered. I wanted to, like, we can get into the whole climate change thing, but I really don't want to do that. Just to point out that I wanted to do something that had some kind of importance, but also I wanted to be smart. So science and I guess it wasn't really activism, but there's always been something that made me want to do something that was larger than myself. So that's always been there. It's just that has changed substantially as I've gotten older. So even though I came to Canada from the UK in 2017, I'm also Canadian, and I went to school in Canada. My family are also from Quebec. I'm sort of half English, half French Canadian. And so my early years education was in Canada. So I went to primary school in Canada. So I think I retained some of that. I do remember a lot of environmental activist type education. Like I look back and I recognize the budding of that kind of activist education. But then I went to the UK and the education was completely different there. And now I do see it at the university. We were encouraged to get involved in advocacy is what they would call it at the time. But my actual education itself was empirical science. So in a way that kind of helped me. So I was still very trained to think empirically. So what I mean by that is that you start with a hypothesis and then you're testing that null hypothesis, right? So you're looking for the answer in that. So that was still a thing in the early 2000s, even though we were encouraged to do advocacy. Now that's completely different. And I think in Canada, that situation has been more ideological for a longer time at universities, but now we're seeing it in school. So anyway, coming back to the question of faith, possibly, yeah, I'm not close to the idea. Like in the past, I was very much atheist. Now, I'm very open to it. I do think that there's something compelling us all, and there is the curious hand of God. And so I'm not going to deny that at all. But I'm also not coming from when I'm doing my work. I suppose the advantage of I guess, an empirical science background, research background in doing investigative journalism work, is that I take the same approach. No, I mean, not quite. I'm not designing experiments or anything like that, but I'm trying to take that approach. And so when I say I'm not coming from a Christian perspective, it's because I'm really trying to look at the patterns and describe them. But I can say Christianity absolutely is targeted. There's no doubt about that.
Right. Just give her an amen on that one. Hey, pastors? Chris, can you give somebody a tip if they want to get started on this? Because you kind of just threw yourself into it, getting a show with Carrie and doing your thing. Want to give a tip? They did not get the questions ahead of time.
Honestly, probably not, because I did it by accident. Like, it wasn't something, I never aspired to be a podcaster or an influencer or a guy that somebody noticed in an airport in Minneapolis trying to get a connecting flight. That wasn't a thing for me. So I don't really have any tips. But if I had to give any advice about this type of thing, I would say once you learn as much as you can, gather unto yourself the wisdom that you need to make the good decisions, and figure out what you want to see for a solution, and then focus on it and go there. Like, don't change because somebody on the internet says, oh, you're whatever, or they don't agree with you. Just focus on what you want and what you want to accomplish, and do it. It's not easy because we live in an absolute cesspool of an internet of negative stuff. So it's difficult to navigate that. But if you can separate that from just focusing on your goals and what you want to change, I think that's the best we can do.
Lawrence, in your best 90-second rant, let me know what you thought about the last floor crossing.
Wild. All right. Okay. Can I actually record this at the same time?
Yeah, let's do that. Let's do that.
Make a video from the stage.
Actually, go ahead.
Let's be okay.
Yeah. You're gonna see how the sausage is made, folks. This is how it's done.
Oh, you're really doing it.
You've been paying attention.
What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? I was just asked, what do I think about the last floor crosser, Marilyn Gladu? Well, come on, ladies and gentlemen. If you don't think Canada is over by now, you shake your head, because Marilyn Gladu is supposed to be a conservative. Like, she supported us at the trucker convoy. She supported conservative-backed bills. She literally, if you look her up, she is what a conservative is. But what did she get? What did she get? She turned her back on all of the constituents in her riding. And then just the other day, she came out with a statement that said, I did it for my constituents. This is how you know that Canada is over, ladies and gentlemen, is when a politician can go out, put a statement out there and say, you know what? My constituents told me to do it. Yeah, the ones that voted Liberal, lady. That's what I think.
That was awesome.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. I wasn't expecting that. That was pretty cool. So make sure you go follow him and share that one out there. Let's make that viral, okay? Absolutely. Now, you spent a lot of time, Lawrence, fighting the don't split the vote. Maybe you should have spent some time on don't switch the vote, because that's what we saw happening here. One more time here, last question for you. What do you have to say to Albertans and Canadians and everybody else watching about bearing witness? Nice, easy one for you.
Just do it. I really thought, and I don't know if my other panelists would agree with this, so I've always been kind of a loudmouth. So I always spoke in my mind. And I really thought, when I started doing those videos for other people who didn't want to come forward, I thought, oh, they're just a little bit scared. And so if I just model the way forward, people will come along. And that was several years ago. And although I'll tell you what, if you do it, you will absolutely find success. You will find a new group of people. But that crowd that you expect that will come along, I haven't quite seen that. So I don't know. What can I tell you? Just do it. That's what I would like to tell people. Don't be so scared, because it's not as scary as you think it is. That's what I would say.
I now owe Nike $10 for using that. Just do it. Yeah. Don't say you need a break today, right? Okay, we don't need that one either. Chris, how about you? Any last messages for people that are thinking about bearing witness?
Yeah, I would agree. I think we have a tendency in this day and age to self-censor, myself included. We see things that we want to speak out about and we don't because what's work going to think? You know, what's work going to think, right? What's my family going to think? And so we don't. But the reality is, if you're thinking something, there's probably a lot of other people that are as well. And if you just think back to the good old days of 2020, when you thought the world was going crazy and everyone around you was nuts, and then you're like, no one's speaking up, so maybe I'm the crazy person, and you didn't actually realize that you were the majority until other people did, right? So it doesn't matter if people agree with you or not. There are other people that are like-minded, and I think we just have to focus on what we believe, what we know is the right thing to do, and do it regardless of what other people think. And there are sacrifices to be made. People, you'll lose things, you'll lose jobs. I've lost customers. 90% of my customers at the cafe are people from out of town. 90%. And that used to be a really busy cafe, mostly local people. It's not anymore. That's the reality. But I wouldn't trade that for sacrificing and ignoring my principles so that I could feel comfortable in that way. You know, there's different types of comfort, and I'd rather be comfortable with my choices and decisions that I'm making, knowing that I'm doing what I believe in, than doing what I think everyone else wants me to see, or what everyone wants to see me do.
Lawrence, any final closing statements for anybody that wants to consider bearing witness out there?
Yeah, absolutely. First and foremost, I drive from Langdon, Alberta to Muir, Alberta for cinnamon buns. So there's no excuse for anybody else not to go to Whistle Stop. Cinnamon buns are on point. I talked a little bit about my addiction tonight. And I used to tell people that I walked with the devil for 20 years of my life. That's what I used to say until somebody came up to me and they said, God was with you the whole time. And, I don't like the word born again, but, for the past 5.5 years, I've really allowed God to just pave my way. That's what's happened in my life. Everything I've gone through, I've had to go through in order to prepare myself for tomorrow, right? And today. And that's just like my addiction. If anybody ever has read Footprints in the Sand, that's literally my story of addiction. He carried me through that. I share my addiction a little bit online. That's bearing witness as well. Because of that, I've helped over 55 people stay sober. And that's another reason why I share that. So it's not just politics for me. It doesn't have to be just politics. It can be your life experience. Maybe you're going through depression. I had that. I had addiction, mental health issues, raising a family, young. Find your niche. Find what it is that you can make change and make real difference. And maybe it is politics. But, bearing witness can be in politics or any other aspect of your life. And, you can really absolutely build community and change people's minds. Chris here is literally the main reason why I support Alberta independence today.
Let's give a big round of applause for all our speakers today. There. You're all very amazing people, and you all just bared witness. Thank you very much. You got a flight. You got to get out of here.
I got 2 minutes.
You got 2 minutes? But I want to thank you all very much as well. You traveled from Ontario. You came down, took some time out of your busy schedule. You came up here and did your table and merch. And then to our other speakers who had to run because they're very busy people. I appreciate all of you guys. Without your yeses, I would just be a goofball up here talking.
I think we all need to thank Jason.
Yes.
Because if it wasn't for Jason, we wouldn't all be here.
Absolutely. He does amazing work.
And Paula. Paula, get up here.
Yeah, and Paula.
Get up here.
Paula.
Without her, this doesn't happen. Tea and coffee in the morning, Paula and Jay.